Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 18th meeting of the Town of Richmond Selectboard. Would anybody like to make public comment before the meeting? Jeff?
I just want to acknowledge what we're in again. For, many of this is, this rain is an inconvenience. And for some folks, it'll be, more than an inconvenience, it'll be an economic hardship. But I think for a lot of folks, there's also an emotional cost. This is difficult to do so frequently. I don't have any answers for that. There is a phone service 211 for all kinds of services if anybody needs any emotional support. But I just wanted to acknowledge that this could be a really difficult time for some of our neighbors, and to keep that in mind, take it into consideration. In addition to saying Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, ask them how they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff.
Just to follow up on what Jeff said, we all know people are going through a lot. We know people are also going through a lot more that they're not sharing. So just a general reminder to be polite, be kind.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. It's a good thing to remember. Anything else? Seeing no hands up, let's move to additions, deletions, or modifications to the agenda. Are there any?
I think we should add a flood update for today's flood events.
I think that's reasonable.
Just do that at the start of the meeting.
Barb did a thumbs up. Okay, so I think we're good. We can't really see it. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Any other additions? Okay, seeing none. Then we would move into our warrant agenda, and I would like to yield to our town manager, Josh Arneson, for a quick flood update.
Okay, so as everybody knows, we've had a lot of rain today. That combined with the snow melt out of the mountains has caused the Winooski River to come up quite quickly. I was in touch with the National Weather Service. The first thing they told me was it's not going to get as high as it did in July. However, as Steve Cody noted in the previous meeting, it's maybe coming up a little faster than it did in July. So, and perhaps a little bit more unexpectedly. What that means for roads is right now, Bridge Street is closed at the bridge with water over the bridge over the road on either side of the bridge. Route 2, the state has it closed from the intersection of Bridge Street to the intersection of Cochrane Road. You can get down it from Bridge Street down heading east. The water really isn't over it until you get down to Jonesville. But the state did put on their website to be careful that there could be other water coming over the road in other spots. So that's why they closed it there. So proceed with care if you go that way. Kenyon Road was closed earlier in the day. There was a mudslide there on the side of the road that the highway crew got out and repaired. That reopened about 4:15 or so this afternoon. I think that's it for road updates right now. Be careful overnight. The water is expected to continue to rise until sometime after midnight this evening, and then it'll start to taper off and come down at that point, but expect it to get higher now.
I believe Montpelier said their crest was expected around 1:30 a.m.
Yeah.
So add 45 minutes to that maybe, and so I wouldn't be out around 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and then just from a wastewater update, just to give a quick update there. The water that leaves the plant, it's a treated water from water and sewer. This is water that goes into the river anyway. There's a pipe that goes out to the river. That pipe began backing up this morning, and they had to switch to an auxiliary method where they sump pump it up and out directly out of the building rather than pumping it to the river. The state's been informed, the proper reports have been filled out. They understand what's going on. Steve has P&P septic on standby. If the pump station on the south side of the bridge or south side of the river ends up getting inundated and turns off, we'll have P&P septic pump the sewer lines out from there, drive to the north side, put it back into the sewer so it can gravity feed into the system and still be treated, but avoid overflows on the south side. And the pump for the water house has been turned off. The system's been isolated, so there's no transfer from the pump into the system. And if that water house gets flooded, it will be isolated from the system. The reservoir is pretty much full. Last time we had a flood, we were on the reservoir without pumping for 5 to 6 days, and we were able to make it through there. So I think we're in okay shape if we do have to go on a boil water notice. But if it doesn't get as high as it did in July, the water house should hopefully be okay, because it only had a couple inches of water in it last July. So hopefully we get through that without any more effects of the water house.
Okay, questions from the board? Okay, we have a question from Carol Benny.
Just a
Sarah?
quick question, Jay. Was the town able to connect with Maple Wind to make sure that the birds have been moved from the fields? So that we don't have the issue that's happened for 3 times now. I did drive by and see that there's still units down there. I didn't know if they had birds in them. I didn't know if that was going to be something that was added to the town's list of things to try to help out with.
Kara, I didn't call, but it would be a worthy item to include in our town disaster management plan as part of a checklist. Josh, have you had any communication?
I haven't had communication with them. I've been more focused on roads and water and sewer today.
Okay. So Kara, the answer is no, we haven't, but yes, we probably should have.
Do we need to possibly just like contact Josh the days before when they said flooding is going to be coming, so that maybe we contacted him days before the emergency?
But it's also, I mean, I'm sorry, but they're a private business and private owner. They have a responsibility to also be aware of what's going. Like, I don't know that it's the town's role to tell all the private business owners that water's coming. I mean, I can do what I can to reach out. I think today's event got higher than any of us thought, fairly quickly. I can try to put it on a list to call them, but I think they need to also be aware and be monitoring the river.
And I know, and I'm not trying to harp on anybody, but these are animals that's happened 3 times already, that they have had animals drowned. So I just think it's inhumane. And, you know, this isn't the same thing as somebody's driveway washing out and needing to be repaired. This is just, it's torture to animals.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the regulations regarding poultry are much less stringent than they are for 4-legged creatures. And that's something that Mary Hull and I have been in contact with our legislators about, seeing what we can do.
Thank
Okay.
you. It's just down the road for me, so that's why I see it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Our first item on the original agenda pertains to an update from the Volunteers Green and Browns Court Project Committee, including consideration of approval of a structural engineer for renovations to the Volunteers Green Bandstand. If I may, we received $1.2 million in ARPA money. We have allocated all but $450,000, give or take a nickel or two. And we have prioritized using that money for recreational purposes, acknowledging that that was a high priority on the survey that we asked town residents to contribute to. There were very, very large numbers of people asking for increased access to recreation. So with that in mind, we asked for volunteers to a committee to investigate what could be done with that money. And we asked them to consider Volunteers Green, Browns Court, and the Round Church Lawn. And everything I've heard is that the committee has been working extremely hard, for which I'm grateful. And they are here tonight to present to us in general what they've been doing, but also to ask us to approve, if I recall correctly, some money for engineering on the rehabilitation of the bandstand. So with that introduction, I'd like to invite the members of the committee who are here in person to come up to the table. And I also acknowledge that we have a number of the committee coming in remotely. Okay, so welcome. And as you're beginning, just please state your names as you speak.
Denise Barnard, co-chair of the 3 Parks Committee.
Fran Thomas, committee person.
Tess Storrs, committee person.
So Denise asked me to speak first on Volunteers Green, but we're not really going to give you a total update of all what we're doing. It's mainly some issues that are present right now. We have been looking at the band shell at Volunteers Green, and it has some issues.
that need to be addressed. So Gary Bresser, who will be talking in a minute, has been talking to some engineers and has gotten a quote for the structural engineers to look at the band shell and see what can be done to strengthen the beams or replace the beams, deal with the concrete floor, which floods, and when anybody wants to use it and there's been rain, it does not drain at all. So he has gotten a quote from one set of engineers and has not been able to get any other quotes, but in order for us to move forward, and Gary will talk more, we need to hire an engineering firm to look at the band shell and give us some thoughts on what they think needs to be done. So I'll turn it over to Gary.
Welcome, Gary. Floor is yours.
Thank you. So Fran and Denise asked me to get involved a little bit on the band shell because I was part of about 35 volunteers who built the band shell 47 years ago. And so I know the foundation, I know the structure pretty well. So the first thing we did is we noticed some work that needed done on the heavy timbers. Is I contacted Miles Janeth out of Huntington, who has a really good heavy timber construction company, and he met me down there and he told me what he would do and gave us a price on what he would do to fix it. But he said before he would do it, he would require the structural engineer looked at it and told him exactly how it should be done. So there's two things, as Fran said, that really needs work, and some is like the crossing beam and one of the posts that holds up the crossing, the scissor truss on the front. There's some rot in some of those beams, so Miles's bid was to replace all the front structure, heavy timber front structure on that. And then there's some sagging on the crossing beam where it meets, and he said he's seen where they've used steel to come down and to attach to the crossing point to keep that truss much stiffer. So the first person I contacted is the structural engineer I use and that Hillview Design and Construction uses. It's located in Richmond. Sellers Traybell Structural Engineers, and John Traybell was, I think, the person that both of us use it. John's very easy guy to work with. We met out there and he did give me a proposal, which was for $5,000 for the design portion, and then later on, if we go with him during construction, it'd be $1,500 for oversight. I think the committee at this point is just asking for the $5,000. The concrete portion is a little bit tricky because of the way the foundation was designed. It's not like a 8-foot walls. It's about 8 feet down. There's a footing ring, and then on top of that is a more structural ring, and then on all the corners there are like 12-inch sonotubes that come up almost to ground level, and then there's another 2-foot ring. And I'm not sure, I wasn't involved in designing that. I'm not sure why the engineer designed it that way, whether there was some flood things he was worried about. But anyway, it kind of makes it hard to just take the slab off and compact. Because right now, instead of having a slight pitch from the center of the band shell floor out in all directions so water sheds, it's a negative pitch in and it captures water. So we'd want to have a good design for that and for the wood structure. So with that one bid, then I found out that the town requires 3 bids. So I went out and talked to 6 other structural engineers. Most of them said they were too busy or the job was too small. I mean, to spend a bunch of time putting in a bid for a job that's only $5,000 in the engineering world, that's a really small job. One person said he could get back to us with a bid for what his bid would be in April. And they just said every structural engineer they knew was just totally backed up. So unless the board decides they want me to keep looking, I think we should go with the John Trable. I think the board would be very happy with him.
Kendra could share the
Just share the
screen.
screen for that quote.
Please do, Kendra.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is that bid that Gary was referring to. And you'll see if I keep scrolling down, the amounts are here, but it has all the level of detail. This was also submitted to Josh in advance.
It was in the packet for select board too.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions, Jeff?
I really appreciate the work that was done. My understanding of our procurement policy is that, while, it's desirable to get 3 bids, you only have to try to do that. And if you are unable to do that, that's okay, you know, and they don't have to be under $15,000. I don't think they have to be bids. They can be quotes, which is really a different level of complication. And so with that in mind, I think this is a good plan. Myself, says I move to approve the use of $5,000 in ARPA funds to pay for engineering for the rehabilitation of the band shell.
This is David, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion from Jeff, seconded by David, to approve the use of $5,000 in ARPA funds to pay for engineering for the rehabilitation of the band shell. Is there anything else that the committee would like to share regarding the band shell in particular? We have, according to our packet, a number of other updates you'd like to share, but let's focus for the moment on the band shell. Any questions regarding the band shell or anything you'd like to share?
No, it's just that this is an important part of Volunteers Green. It's been there for quite a few years. It's been painted on the outside and had a new roof over time, but that's really all that's been done. And it's nobody, really watching it structurally.
Right, and one thing that has been a topic in the last year or so is ADA access, that right now there's really no way into the stage for somebody who's a little mobility impaired. And I believe last summer somebody was fairly seriously hurt. That's not acceptable. So thank you for your work on that.
And we are looking at that part, but that's kind of a different.
Okay,
We have to get it saved first.
yeah. Yeah, no one wants to get into a stage of the ceiling might fall on you. Okay, Kara?
Can I ask that the ADA requirement be built into this scope of work, since we're talking about engineering structures and the foundation, that how that foundation is and how if it's a concrete ramp or whatever kind of ramp to have access is to it is addressed with the engineer as well. I think that'd be a very important piece. The other question that I have is relating to, since the support beams and the beams due to exposure against, with weather and conditions, it was talked about that we were looking at potentially being able to do the other half of the roof. I know that's not how it was originally designed, but as the age of the building has shown you that maybe a little bit different aspect of structural change might help it last longer and could be utilized for not just band concerts, but as a pavilion that could be rented out as well for different like family reunions and events and stuff like that. And when only half the concrete is covered, it doesn't make for as large a space as it could possibly be. And I'm just asking because I know I talked to Gary directly about this, and it was something that he wasn't opposed to since he originally helped create the band shell. I'm asking if we could consider that, since it's an engineer that's going to look at the roof structure, and if it's better to complete the other half of the roof, it's more cost effective and it would last longer and have more use, then is that something that could be built into the scope of work as well?
I'm not sure, and maybe Gary could answer that relative to these engineers. We are looking at, making it ADA accessible, but that is kind of another issue because it has to deal with what you can do in the floodplain, and the roof, we are going to try and, see if we can come up with some ideas, but again, that is what can we do with it being, in the floodway.
Jay,
Right.
could I address, Jay, could I address that just for a minute? The floodway the floodplain with regards to this structure. The floodplain has a clause in it that you can expand 25%. The roof structure would not be part of that 25%, just the posts coming down would be. And the ADA outweighs any floodplain regulation. The federal government, the state, and the town cannot prohibit access. So it would still be within that 25% expansion number, and it still should be okay, Fran. So we wouldn't want to skip it and not have it be part of the engineering.
Okay,
I'm
Lisa's-
100% sure of that.
Lisa's had her hand up for a bit. Lisa, please go ahead.
She's muted.
You're muted, Lisa.
Okay, sorry. Working out of the bedroom here. Why don't you let Kara go ahead and finish on her thoughts and then I'll come in.
I am sure that the band shell can have the rest of the roof done and the ADA addressed with the engineers, and it would be allowed in the floodplain where it is right now. And I'm going to give you an example. We are looking to spend 9.8 million on the building in the floodplain that the town owns. I'm 100% positive you can do this to the band shell.
Okay, so we've got a lot left to hear. Let's take note of that and explore that. Lisa, could you go ahead?
Yeah, I just kind of had some matter of degree questions about the scope of services and so forth. I don't need to ask those right now if you don't want, but I can if you want.
Okay, well, Gary is got his hand up as well. I suspect he has a response ready.
Glad he's ready before I have the question. Yeah, I guess, does anyone have an idea of the overall budget that's going to be needed for this? I know it hasn't been designed in detail and so forth, so it's just an estimate, but is there any
No.
kind of estimate for the full
Can't
repair?
move forward until we know what the engineer says.
Right, we simply
Okay.
don't know how structurally deficient in many ways it is. Jeff, go ahead.
Okay. Will that
So
be a
it-
part of the scope of work for the first review of this?
Yeah, so, we're not talking
I
about.
believe so, Lisa.
We're just trying to get a handle on what needs to be done.
We're not talking about design tonight. We really don't need to talk about design tonight.
Mhm.
The first step is doing the engineering. If we want to add to the scope of this engineering, they'd have to go back and get another quote. And there is a time constraint here. So it seems to me that we should just go forward with this now. We should keep these other issues in mind as we go further down the design path. Nothing that you're doing that I can see precludes any of these other design
Correct.
ideas. Right.
No, fair
Excellent
enough.
point. Okay, Bard?
So for those of you who don't know, I spent most of my career working for the Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living. In my opinion, I don't think it's possible to move this forward without a plan that's specific at some point about ADA compliance. I think that's just you gotta have kind of, I guess it's reinforcing Kara's point. And I'm not sure about now, later, but it's not optional, in my opinion.
Great. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, but we also have some other updates from you, correct?
We do.
Okay,
Should we vote on this one?
I was about to say, maybe we should just go ahead and vote on the motion and then let you have the floor for the rest of your updates. Is that acceptable, Lisa? Bard, are you ready to vote just on that and move on? Okay, please state, we have a motion made by Jeff Forded, second by David Sander, to approve $5,000 in ARPA funds to pay for engineering for the rehabilitation of the band shell. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa,
Jeff?
aye? Oh, sorry.
David, I.
Bard?
I'm really wrestling with this because I think the ADA compliance is profoundly significant. So, I'm only voting yes if somebody can assure me that this is going to, by the end of the day, be ADA compliant. So,
Of course.
We can
Yeah.
assure you.
Yeah,
okay,
course.
then I can vote yes.
I will vote aye, so the motion passes.
thank you.
Thank you again for your work on that score, but now by all means, please share anything else you'd like to share.
Okay, so now we'd like to invite, if with your permission, Mr. Chair, John Lind, who is an architect, to come forward. He has drawn Brown's Court.
Mhm.
And we'd like to discuss it with you. This is for you, Jay. But John is, if you give John permission, he's going to share his screen.
Does he have permission, Josh?
This is still Kendra, I think. Well, everybody has permission as long as Kendra stops.
I'm going to have
John,
Kendra-
is this what you want me to share, or do you want to share your own?
It is. I'm happy to share it from my screen if you'd like, so
Perfect.
I can.
I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Kendra.
John Lynn, I'm a local. Most of you all know me. Grew up here. Used to play ball in this field. I'm an architect. I'm a partner in a local design build firm. This is admittedly beyond what we typically do. We concentrate more on residential design. It seemed like a good opportunity where I could help out and at least get something schematic out on the table, looking at what's going up on Brown's Court. I was slated with putting in a ball field up there, or at least showing one, 200-foot fence from home plate as far as the scope of the field, 4 pickleball courts, bocce court, and 20 parking spaces. Assuming gravel parking in there, bleachers for the ball field. It's all really, really rough. Can't emphasize that enough. It's very much a concept drawing. Hasn't been vetted. I think back along with the lines that you were looking at with the structural, this design here is laid out using Agency of Natural Resources maps and a GPS tracking map. They're notoriously inaccurate. The next steps before doing any development up here, I think, should be a site survey, including at least top of bank.
Okay.
John, could you explain the dimensions on the field, just for clarification? And also, I mean, they can see it, but where you were coming from?
Yep. So the ball field's back sort of in its probably original configuration. I have home plate close to the parking area, trying to keep all the pedestrian access near where vehicles are coming and going, trying to keep it kind of a social engagement. The bocce court right now is shown as about 13 feet by 80 feet. I know they vary a little bit in length. That's just what I've got laid out right now. Pickleball courts, there's 4 of them. The overall footprint is 60 feet by 120 feet. The ball field, as I understand it, is a middle school size softball field. From the pitcher's mound to home plate's 50 feet. It's 200 feet from home plate to the outfield. That puts it in line also with the high school. 65-foot baselines.
Okay. Bart?
John, what I remember of my days coaching and practices on this game, if I remember correctly, it's been in at least 2 locations, the softball field. And if I recall correctly, part of the reason for the current softball field was to reduce sun in the eyes of the first base person.
Okay.
So I don't know, if there's thought on that in terms of late afternoon, the sun coming down, and my experience with the girls and younger girls, that's sun in the eyes for first base players is somewhat contraindicated. I don't know if you've thought about sun layout in terms of this proposal or this rough draft.
That was brought up, and then someone from the board was going to go talk to, or the committee rather, was going to go talk to Pete Goslin and see why it shifted. Totally makes sense. I had a hard time fitting it on the site spun in that direction. But again, that's me using these A&R maps, and I don't have a lot of faith in that. I think when we can get a real hard survey and top of bank, then we can tell for sure if it'll fit in which configuration. Appreciate the feedback though.
Josh?
I just, John, thanks. I just have a dimension question. I thought in the meeting last week, you said the fences were 220 in this mock-up, or did you change it to 200?
I did. I reduced it to 220 based on your advice.
Thanks. I
Or
just wanted to
to
make
200
sure
rather. They were originally shown at 220.
okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that I was looking at the right thing.
Yep.
So that's, John, that's a modified, design from what we saw the other night then.
It is. I've shortened that run from home plate to the outfield by 20 feet.
So the purpose of this was to give people an idea of what can or cannot be done up there. And the comment was made that you could have a ball field and housing up there. And I certainly, you might have a few tents, but I don't see how you could possibly have any housing and recreational up there. So this was a way to sort of for us and for other people to get an idea of what could possibly be done. I think the pickleball courts might go in a different direction.
That's across the river. And
Okay, I have a dumb question because I'm not at my best today. What are the bright green lines?
Okay, so the bright green lines, as John alluded to, it's a map that anybody can purchase.
Oh.
And so the dots on that bright green line are where there's possible building that could be done.
Oh,
That doesn't go down a ravine, that's actual space that you can actually walk on. The dark, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, the darker green lines on the outside, that's where between the map that Jeff forwarded and the map that Josh forwarded are what the town thinks are the dimensions of this property, which plus or minus 3.06 acres. But in doing some research, we found that some of the properties that are bordering on Brown's Court, their actual deed says borders the recreation field. So a survey, it needs to be done. Also wanting to point out, a possible horseshoe pit is not yet shown, as well as the water fountain. As you would come in to the left, there's, P. Goslin stated that it's all ready to go, just need to put the fixture on it.
Mm.
And it was there, it was taken out, but it's all ready to go. It would be a water fixture. On the bottom feeds animals, on the top feeds people, and then you can also fill your water bottles. The other thing that we mentioned, and Fran brought this up in one of our meetings as we did research with the pickleball courts, there's a punk noise to bocce, and I've got a video if anybody wants to listen. Pickleball, I'm sorry, pickleball. So we thought behind where that kind of that circle is, we might do a row of cedars just to lessen some of the noise that, I think it's Burnett Court over there. We contacted neighbors at Burnett Court as well as neighbors on Brown's Court. The 20 space parking lot, which is gravel, we met with, at the site, we met with two representatives from the parking committee, Chuck Gilroy and Diane Mariano. They were wonderful and they had many suggestions that we totally agree with and things we hadn't thought of. But they came up with the parking and John helped us to put it all together.
okay. Another question. I'm looking at the existing satellite photography. Can I share for just a sec?
As long as John stops sharing.
John, could you stop sharing for a moment? Thank you. I am not an architect.
I think it's Jericho Road you're talking about, not Burnett Court, where the cedar trees would go.
No, it's Burnett Court to the north.
Linda McCarthy.
Okay, so this is what's current on Google Maps as far as satellite
Yeah.
imagery. And of course, this doesn't show the outfield fence. You know, it kind of makes it imply that the whole thing is the outfield. Have there ever been times where we actually managed to get two fields up there where they kind of, the outfields kind of run up against each other, kind of like we do? It's always just been one.
Always been one.
Okay. And so,
But it's really, I mean, it's not the expanse that you see down at Volunteer Spring.
Right.
right.
John, I hate to put you on the spot and with your permission, Could you show the work that Pete Goslin did in the year, help me out, that you found
2000s.
on Google
Yes,
History?
I think. Yep.
So there was a road at one time going all the way down the right.
Hmm.
See it?
wow.
Yeah, it was,
That-
it went
that's-
all the way
This
to
is
the
the
back.
current. This is 2015.
Hmm.
In
Huh.
2012, they did an incredible amount of work along this end. I think it started November 2011. This is May 2012.
And that was because of existing substance and erosion. They put that in, or?
We don't know. We need to talk with Pete Goslin.
That would have been when the Jericho Road project was happening.
Can I point out, the image that was just up, you could see the shadow of an earlier location.
Storage.
Right
Yep.
there.
That's
So-
2009. If we go up here into 2006, that's where the
Yeah,
Yeah,
ball field was.
I think that must be what I'm remembering because I knew it used to. Yeah, I guess in part of my brain, I thought there were two because there was one here and one there, but just not at the same time.
Right.
and I'll only point out, and I am trying not, I really don't mean this to be controversial, but we asked the planning and zoning the same question, what could fit there? There is a competing map or an alternative map in the next agenda item, because it started with not whether it's desirable, but is it even possible with footprints? What can you put there? So there is at least one other version of a map of this property for what that's worth, which for many will be nothing.
Right. I'd like to invite at this point members of the public, of which we have several online and here. If you have questions about this proposed configuration, or if you just want to sign up for pickleball, would anybody like to ask questions of the committee?
I have
Morgan?
So,
Introduce yourself.
Morgan Walliver, I live on Tilden Avenue, down the hill from Brown's Court, and it's watching this from 30,000 feet, not really involved, but my comments is probably echo what a lot of people in the community is that you feel like if you live close to it, you're giving something up. And that is, we walk up there, we take our dog up there. It's a nice place in the winter time that you can walk to. You don't have to get in a car. And this might sound odd in the state of Vermont, but I feel like we're giving up a green space. Right, so it's my comments, and I once this is in place, nothing against pickleball. I've heard a lot about the amount of noise it can make, but once you give up a space like that, the town's made an investment. It is, it will be pickleball as well as maybe volleyball. I think they're all great sports. I just not sure that this is the right place for it. And I say personally is probably other people in the community, whether you're on Tilden Avenue, Brown's Court, or Burnett, there that you may be giving something up.
Morgan, I think that's a good point to raise, and I would just want to ask, how frequently is the softball field? Actually, I have a couple of questions. How many games per week of softball actually get played up there? Ballpark, any idea?
I'm not sure, but I did learn something new last week that I didn't even know was going on. Our senior group has a co-ed softball league that plays there, and I didn't even know that.
So I can, from a little league perspective, for about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe a little bit longer in some seasons, pretty much every night on Saturday, there's softball up there for little leaguers. And then sometimes that bleeds into summer and fall. If we have too many baseball teams, sometimes baseball will play up there a bit at that time. But in the spring, it's used pretty much every day for 2 months.
Okay, so the reason I ask is because in the existing configuration, I mean, this appears to have an actual outfield wall.
Oh, no,
Well, I'm looking here and there's posts along the perimeter like there's a fence up.
we haven't talked about. a wall.
Okay, so that's just a
Ju-
cool idea.
This is just this is just a schematic to give you an idea
For
of what,
size.
what
Size.
space
Okay.
is available up
So if we
there.
don't have an actual fence and we're selling advertising and all that.
Yeah.
So I guess where I'm going with this is currently when there's no softball game, you can walk up there and walk around on the softball field. And for part of the year, you would walk up there and go, oh, there's a game going on. But for much of the rest of the year, it would still essentially be green space. That's kind of how I would see it, but I don't walk up there, so.
So Jay, it's Bart, two more comments. One, it is from my brief research, it appears to be a strong recommendation of ASA, et cetera, that there be a softball field fence. And it depends on age group and size. If I recall correctly, for the 200 feet, they suggest 4 feet. So there's a stopping place for multiple uses, among other things. The other thing, which is very unrelated, something that had some momentum a number of years ago was tennis courts. So I don't know if that came up in your deliberations, interest or configuration for tennis court.
Could I defer to Test Stores? Test did all the research regarding the pickleball and has met with hundreds, tons of people. So I'm gonna let Tess answer that
Yes,
one.
by all means.
First of all, one of the first things I did was to go and email different people. And that would be like rec department heads, town personnel. What happened here is that I was given a list of names of different contractors who were building pickleball and or tennis courts. I then in return try to contact these people to get estimates. Well, Advantage Tennis in St. Johnsbury, I called them and really didn't get a whole lot of help. I contacted Vermont Port Surfacing in St. Johnsbury, and I did receive an estimate for installation as well as maintenance cost. I also happened to speak to somebody from Waterbury, but it turns out that that person is a subcontractor for this particular company. The quote that I was given for the pickleball courts, and I was also assured orally, and I can get a written estimate, I'm sure, was 110,000 to 115,000. When I spoke to the person who,
For all four?
pardon,
Yeah.
for four
Everything that
courts.
goes with it.
And that includes
Fence
the
and-
fencing, the line marking, the excavation.
The Skycam, the lights, the.
So it's very inclusive. When I spoke to the people in Waterbury, this was totally a mistake on my part. I thought that they did a total installation as well. They don't, but it turns out that they are the excavators for these people. And when I spoke to the gentleman there, he said that if the town wanted to do any of the ground moving, any kind of prep work for them, that they were very receptive to that to keep the cost down a little bit. As far as maintenance goes, I was given a price originally that was a little bit less. I think when I asked for the written estimate, I'm assuming that he put in a cost increase. I was given a cost of 12 to 14,000 with maintenance occurring 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
I also contacted Vermont Recreational Surfacing and Fencing. They're in Monroe, New Hampshire. I have been trying to communicate with her for several times, trying to get an estimate. I'm not getting a response. I'm getting some, I don't know, just kind of a postponement kind of thing. These are the people that actually put the new ports in at Airport Park and
In Colchester?
Airport Park
Colchester.
in Colchester. Those were built in 2019. The cost for that, for the construction was roughly 164,000 with also a $10,000 consulting design, the specification project manuals. I can't figure out whether that I don't think the 10,000 was coming from the Vermont Recreational Surfacing and Fencing. I think the town of Colchester hired somebody to do a lot of their planning.
Okay,
That's what I think. I can't.
Can
be
you
100%
explain
sure.
to Jay, tennis versus
Yes,
pickleball?
yes. Thank you. When I spoke to Vermont Tennis Court Servicing, the price that they gave me, I said, how does that compare with the tennis
Mhm.
court? And he said, just about the same. He said, the difference is that with your pickleball courts, the fencing is usually 6 feet.
Mhm.
They said with the tennis court, it's 10 to 12. And he said, you're within a pretty close range. Now I can go back and get a specific. I looked at it and said, we're looking at this blueprint of 60 by 120. And I'm thinking this has a potential of servicing 16 people playing pickleball as opposed to 2 or 4 playing tennis at a time. My other concern is that I think one of the criteria for the grant is that it somehow shows that people are out there and exercising and possibly adding some economics to our town. I can tell you that people travel to play pickleball. For years, I have been traveling to Colchester. When I first started playing, I was going to Barry. So it's not uncommon to see people. One of my best friends was coming from Barry to play in Colchester.
Okay.
So there is some traveling.
Right. Well, I think you make a valid point. One of the criteria that we were advised to incorporate into our ARPA decision-making was increasing public health. And I've heard quite a lot from people over the age of 55 who are looking for things to do in town, cardiovascular and flexibility. And 16 people versus 2 is a hard number to argue with. We have a few questions. Ian popped one up in the chat that says, will the bocce and pickleball be available for residents and their guests, or will it be open to the public? Well, obviously that's a decision for the town to make, not just for y'all, but I mean, we would probably want to emphasize residents. We would not want people to show up and find a bunch of people from Morristown there because they're available.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we would enforce that, but that's the bridge we can cross.
Every community has that
Yeah.
kind of issue.
And you had mentioned lights, Jay, and it's,
No.
again, it's not our decision, but our committee decided against the lights for the sake of Burnett Court and Brown Court.
Right, the neighbors.
residents. So we decided it was a dawn, like a light only until dusk.
No, I agree.
Protect them.
Yeah, I personally agree because, I mean, during the summer, there'll be light for people to play until, I don't know, 9 p.m., but you kind of expect a little more noise in this anyway. Okay, Martha, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to address the point about dog walking and kind of a silly thing, but when we're playing up there softball, the co-ed group, the dog walkers are there also. So we share that space with the dogs.
Okay. Patty?
Yeah, I was just wondering how the committee landed on 4 pickleball courts as opposed to like 2. What was the thinking there?
I'm going to speak for myself. I think that when we were looking at the size of one tennis court and 4 people, if you play doubles, versus 16 people could play in 4 courts, and the dimensions were exactly the same as 1 tennis court.
Okay, so that's the size of a tennis court?
That's
Yeah.
exactly the size of a tennis court.
That's good to know.
And pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the US
Pickleball
right
and
now.
maybe in the world.
And,
Oh, that's a good question. How this is a possibly an obvious question, but how much does a bocce court cost?
That I haven't gotten quite to that point, but I have been speaking to Burlington Recreational Department, and through them, I was able to find that Maple Leaf in Colchester installs them, as does Churchill in Charlotte. But through networking, I found 2 gentlemen who constructed their own bocce courts and was told this was something that volunteers could do. I was basically told that it's like building a great big sandbox. Okay. Now there's, I guess, pea gravel at the bottom, a finer stone. And then I was given a name of Hattica's in Castleton. It's a stone company that sells specific stone for the top layer. On this, I have been contacting a couple of people, and Jacqueline has offered his services. He has a truck that he's willing to use, a tractor. Lou White was a member of the Burlington Bocce League, and he's very enthusiastic about it. He has a lot of knowledge about the construction of the courts, the game itself. He's very excited. One of the questions that I had was, because we went and visited Oak Ledge, and it seems like they would have one court, and then there was a space, and then another court. And I was going to ask him, you know, if I had two of these courts in here, what's the space between them? And he said, well, a better solution to that is if you can fit it in, it's to make one court with a separator between them so that you have two courts within. And he says that cuts back on, you know, the materials needed and stuff.
Jeff?
Yep.
A couple more resources that you might want to consider is it Kirsten Santor? She works for the Burlington Parks and Recreation.
I'm sorry.
Kirsten Santor, she's on the Recreation Committee.
Okay.
Okay, she works for Burlington Rec, as I understand. Another resource that I would really encourage you to talk to is Phil Graff. He's the facilities director at Mount Mansfield. Mount Mansfield maintains the tennis courts in Jericho.
Okay.
Jericho
Yeah.
has like a lot of tennis courts. And they're not nothing to maintain. So, and what I would ask, one of the things that I would ask is whatever proposals that you come up with, in addition to project cost, is to come up with annual maintenance costs. What we would need to include in our budget, annual maintenance costs.
Hey, Martha?
I'm sorry, I meant technology has me kind of buffaloed here. I meant to lower my hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Kendra?
Hi, so the one thing I wanted to add to what Tess was saying about the tennis courts versus pickleball is a number of the prices that she received were actually converted tennis courts because folks were finding that bocce was way more popular. So a number of the quotes that she actually saw were that, just as a little additional information.
Okay. Well, I will certainly say, having been to Oak Ledge many times, the bocce courts get some serious use.
You're saying bocce or pickleball?
Bocce.
Okay.
No, Kendra misspoke. Kendra misspoke.
I was talking about the pickleball courts. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Well,
With the bocce ball, you're correct with the bocce ball, though. We also got that as added feedback, and potentially we're looking at a second.
The Burlington bocce ball, and help me with it. You can.
The Burlington Bocce Ball Club, I spoke to a former president of that group, and he said it's gotten so popular that they can no longer accept any more members. And apparently they travel and like.
Can you know, something that really baffles me is why doesn't Williston have one? A pickleball court. They're twice the size of us and they have. Talk about housing. They have housing. Maybe they're.
Williston
They have
does
pickleball
Williston
courts
has pickleball courts.
Where?
Okay.
at the school and down in.
In that gully by Industrial Ave. They converted their tennis courts.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we should probably, I want to thank you all seriously. Victor, you have one more thing
Can
to
we
share?
continue?
Oh, I'm sorry, by all means.
Just briefly in this.
Yes,
I
please.
think this is it.
Oh, no,
would
we've got a
like to
question back there. Okay.
Defer,
Mhm.
but as we were getting into this, and John helped us to understand this, there are so many different lines. No one is for sure how big that parcel is. Our lister card says 4 feet. Last meeting, 4 acres.
Yep.
Last meeting, Jeff said 4 acres. We found A&R, then you came back with a different number. You found another document that came back for a different number. So we're asking our committee, not through the ARPA funds that you have chosen to let us use the 450, but we're asking the town to get this parcel surveyed once and for all. At our last meeting, we discussed it as a committee. We all agreed it needed to be surveyed because we don't know what we're talking about until we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So we'd like it to be surveyed. We asked Josh, and Josh said something about professional services, that you need a quote. And we said, okay, well, we can get a quote. The next day, Josh wrote us a letter and said, I misspoke. We need 3 quotes. The committee worked like feverish all week. We have 3 quotes. Kendra, do you mind sharing the screen?
Yep,
So
John
I'm
has
gonna
to
give you-
stop
there's
sharing
6
his.
hard copies.
Okay.
I'm telling you, we're gonna get this.
They're
done.
fast. Oh, yeah. Are they all the same? Okay.
Yeah, so there's a packet for each. We
Gotcha.
received 3
Wow.
quotes. Kendra, would you like to take this over, please?
Sure. This is the summary of the 3 quotes we got. It outlines the company, the individual who provided it, and what town they're located out of, and the amount of the quote. First being Button Professional Land Surveyors, Chris Haggerty out of South Burlington, which I believe a number of folks mentioned at our committee meeting often he's used. But then, as Denise mentioned, we needed more quotes. So we went out and reached out to O'Leary Burke Civil Associates, Joseph Flynn out of Essex. He came in at 8,000. And Trudell Consulting Engineers, TCE, John Petrowski out of Williston, and his was also 8,000. This is just the summary. I've then included the actual quotes themselves. So first, same order that I just listed them, Chris Haggerty's, and his outlines all of the pieces that he would be looking at. We're following up to ensure that this also includes topography, as John mentioned, as being a very important piece for us to know how much is flat and how much would require rework of the site.
And as
Then-
John mentioned, I'm just gonna go in on
Go
you
ahead.
for a second, Kendra. John mentioned that, yes, we know where the land is, but if you have ever walked that area, there are some very, very steep ravines. So we just want to make sure that we are using the usable land.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So are we able to vote on this tonight? It wasn't warned. This particular thing wasn't warned. Are we able to vote on this or do we have to wait?
If you were. So I don't technically need a motion to hire a surveyor. If you were gonna use ARPA money, then I would need a motion from the board to approve using ARPA money. But if you're like, you know what, this looks good as a board, and we put it in like contract services admin, yeah, we'd probably go over budget at the end of the year. But I think it's a worthwhile project, and I could approve that money because it's out of the regular town budget.
Okay.
So if I get a general consensus, then I'm comfortable moving forward that way.
You know, as far as I feel, you know, no matter what we want to do with this property, we probably have to survey it. So,
Completely agree.
you know, so, you know, it seems like a worthwhile thing to do.
Before I go to Bart and Lisa, I just want to make sure, I apologize for thinking you were done. Clearly you were not.
That's okay.
Well, it was probably obvious. I just was out there. Was there anything else you wanted to cover tonight?
I just really quickly just want to comment on my co-chair Kendra Zersky, Tess Stores, Fran Thomas, Megan Andrews, Mary LaFave, and Jeannie Agner. The 7 members have worked so hard, and I just want to do a shout out to them because everyone has been working hard. We've been meeting every 2 weeks, so I want to thank them publicly.
Okay. So there is a hand up here in the room,
Your service.
and he has been very patient. Sir, would you like to?
My name's Mike Stewart.
I think
My
you're-
wife is sitting at the table up front here.
I think you'll have to come up for the mic.
Oh,
Just so we can hear you better.
okay. I just, before she laid out any of these pickleball things, I helped out and I went up there with a 100-foot tape measure. And we just took some very rough measurements to see that we could fit it in. And I second the thing that we need to get it surveyed because I'm looking at this picture here. We measured out just from home plate through second base out to 225 feet. And it appeared there was plenty of room between that and the woods to get pickleball courts in there, the 60-foot wide with a space between that and the trees and some more space between that and the others. It doesn't appear, looking at this map, like if you turned it in that red direction, that would fit. So I think that looking at that picture that comes down from a satellite, the satellite's not over it, and where it shows the trees overhanging the field isn't really the size of the field. So it's really important to get not only where the boundary lines are, but where the grass line is to see where things will fit in.
And the topography, the
Yes.
You
because
can't build a
the-
thing on
The grass line is all pretty flat, that whole field, but then it drops off. So I just wanted to second that it needs to be surveyed.
okay. So I'm gonna go to Bart and Lisa and then Erin from MMC TV. It looks like she's had a question, and then we may want to move on to our next topic.
I'll just agree with the obvious, this is Bart, that I think it needs to be surveyed with a note of caution. My experience as a resident of the village on Tilden Avenue is that those surveys have a tendency at times to get ugly in a hurry because there is not enough concrete history. It's like the fence that used to be there and estimated stuff. So it is possible, and we've run into this in other areas outside of the village, where the estimate starts to expand. So I just think we should go into with our eyes open.
Mhm.
The other thing I'd say about that, living on the edge of same sort of ravine, the top of the hill, you know, which is essentially the same thing from 10,000 years ago. The top of the hill behind my house has slowly eroded. In 30 years, it's probably eroded 2 or 3 feet. So over 100 years, I don't know, 6 feet. It just, to me, illustrates the benefit of surveying, but eyes open, it might not be as simple as an original estimate suggests.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to mention, and it's in the documents that I gave you, the hard copies, but the McCarthy property located on Burnett Court, they had a survey done in 2006. And one of the surveyors said that they would use that as well. So that would help with some of his research at the town center. So, so there has been a kind of current one. So on that side, at least, there has already been a survey done.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's finish up with Lisa and Erin. Lisa?
Okay, thanks, guys. Yeah, I used Button Surveyors about somewhere in the last 2 or 3 weeks. They did a really good job. They've got all the theodolites and all that stuff to, you know, they're right up to the current moment with technology. And it looks like they're about a little more than half the price of the others that you looked at. I don't see a risk using them. If you want a recommendation, I've used them.
Okay, and then last but not least, Erin, you've been putting your hand up and taking it down. Did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say that either last summer or the summer before, I went to a T-ball game there, and the way the field was used, it was 2 teams playing at the same time, and so one team was over in where the path was laid out on that Google image, and the other team was in the exact opposite corner, and that whole dirt area was used for parking. So anyway, it just seems like they use it for two fields at once, and maybe that's an informal way to do it, but it seems like that's what's happening there. So just FYI, I just want to throw that in. Thanks.
No, that's a good point, and I should have mentioned that when we talked about usage. Frequently on on T-ball and coach pitch practice nights, they will use the field as well as the outfield because they've got 2 teams that need to practice, just like Volunteers Green. Go down there on a Tuesday night, you've got every field used plus 5 teams in the outfield. This is just on the field, it's everybody. And T-ball and coach pitch, the grass works well enough.
And I leave you with 4 questions.
Okay.
Let them do their motion first.
No, we made our motion.
Well, there was, I'm going to hire a surveyor, we're going to make it happen.
You're just going to approve, right?
Yeah, 'cause I'm getting general, yeah, we'll just make it.
And I don't need an answer tonight, but we do need an answer to the first one. Do we go ahead with all this work?
Okay.
Or do we stop? Is there any leeway in the March date? Because with this project and Volunteers Green and, you don't have to answer this then.
Oh, there's leeway in that.
When we come, what kind of, and again, give me the answers another time. What kind of detail are you looking for us when we come back with proposals for each of the 3 places? And then we come back with proposals and, oh yeah, this looks good, and we approve it. Who's going to manage those?
We may have to pay somebody to do that.
Yeah. So
Or
these are just
Denise has nothing but free time.
Yeah. So these are just things to be looking that we would need answers for going forward.
Okay, we'll get you those answers. Thank you. Okay.
You wanted the the answer to the first question tonight. Do you go ahead?
Are we gonna waste our time?
I would be in favor of them going ahead. You may want to stick around for our next item.
Housing.
Because we are talking, is the next item or a couple items out, we're gonna be talking about house.
Perfect.
Okay, ma'am, I saw you sticking.
I just wanted to say, I'm Carolyn Marshall, I live on Brownstone, and I really like this layout. I think they did a really good job. And the school uses it a lot.
Mhm.
And it seems like, it will work very nicely for their use also, for the parking right there, for his trailers and stuff that he brings in, and so I really appreciate what
Yeah.
they've done.
I agree. I think you've done a real, how many years have you lived in Brunswick?
I've been there since I was 2 years old.
For 30 years.
Okay, you win.
Wait for about 20 years.
So we should be clear on, to my mind, it doesn't matter what else we're thinking about. I think you should go ahead. You guys have momentum going and you're doing good work. I don't see why we would ever want you to stop.
Right,
But
but I
that's
do,
me. I don't know.
I'm very favorably inclined on this as well. I think that to do due diligence for people we've asked to present to us on the housing question tonight, that we should not say you wasted your time, but I think that we really can't ask for more from this plan that you've given us. I mean, you've given us everything you reasonably can, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Stephen.
Okay, so our next item does pertain to housing, and I'd like to try to make one thing clear at the start. We would be remiss as members of the Richmond Selectboard if we were not keeping our eyes open and our ears to the ground regarding housing. But we have we are not proposing to eminent domain anybody's land. We are not proposing to ignore the wishes of residents. We're just trying to do our jobs and say, where can we get housing? I heard a very interesting statistic the other day. Homelessness has gone up by 13% in Chittenden County in 1 year. That could be linked in part to the that's a problem with this opioids problem, but that's why we're talking about housing, not because we have a solution in search of a problem. It's because it's a problem and we're just trying to explore all solutions. And that does not have to necessarily include Browns Court. We asked Planning and Zoning Director Keith Oborn, who is with us on the call. That's him in the upper, where is he?
Well, it's different for everybody's screen.
Oh, you're right. He's here at the bottom on our screen. It may not be on yours. To kind of let us know the answer to a fairly nebulous question. Would it even work? Is it even possible to do housing at Browns Court if you just said nope? And so that's kind of what we'd like to hear from Keith on. Could you even do it in the first place? And if not, then we should move on. So Keith, I'll shut up and let you do the talking.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. First thing I'd like to say is I think the rec committee is doing a fantastic job. Honestly, you're doing that due diligence for what it's worth. Both Tyler and I recognize that, and we're truly appreciative. The survey is a must, and so thank you on that. As far as the feasibility of doing any housing on there, it's feasible. I think it's dependent upon what recreation amenities you want to place there. It can be engineered, it could be 3 stories, it could be 2 stories. What I developed today was basically a footprint of parking and the structure, not any paths or amenities that would go along with said structure. The long and the short of it is something can be done there housing wise. I'm confident of that. Is the desire there? That's another question. There are also, as I go down this path further and further, researching this, there are a myriad of issues there. There are access issues, there are survey issues, there potentially may be deed issues, but who knows? I don't know at this point in time. We haven't done that research. So that's where I'm going to leave it at this point in time.
So, Keith, you did send over a mock-up, which I'll share, but I do want to preface it, and let me know if you want to preface it anymore. because we talked about this a bit last week and today. You wanted to stress that, you're not a landscape engineer, you're not an architect. You took some very basic assumptions on size of building and size of parking lot and put them on a map. It's as to scale as it can be, but I think you wanted to be sure that like you put this together rather quickly without any professional help. So, things could change as we look at this. Do you want to preface that anymore? Because I know you were concerned about the quality of work given the short amount of time that you had.
Right. Yeah. I mean, John Lynn and I did have a conversation last week. We are using the same A&R map for both of our representations. John has been graceful enough to potentially assist me with that, specifically at my request for the optics of it and the fact that we would like to collaborate on this in the open. But sans that, I think we're doing a pretty good job of being open with what we're doing. At least I hope we are. And yes, I would preface this by saying that I am not a landscape architect. I'm a geologist by training, so we could leave it just at that. Okay.
Okay, so I'll share what you mocked up with those sort of qualifications. And if you want to walk us through kind of your methodology, it looks like you put some numbers in here.
Sure. So this is based on meters, and there's a meter bar that A&R uses, and I scaled it off of that. This is 20 feet off of the property line, not 10 feet, which is the HDR requirement. I believe it's 20 on the front, 15 on the rear, and 10 on the side. So it's a 6,500 square foot footprint. It's about a 13,000 square foot building, 2 stories, 20 units, 550 square feet per unit. It's just a basic calculation, to be honest with you. Parking is really inclusive of stormwater also. I would say that the stormwater that's coming off of the structure would have to be engineered. Typically, you'd put it right underground, potentially in what's known as a Coltech system in the parking lot. So there's really no any areas for any forebays or bays for stormwater to infiltrate into the ground. Obviously, we haven't done any soil work here. I'm confident that this would be okay soil wise, based on my experience. But this is a rough and dirty draft, and it is definitely open to interpretation and is definitely open for discussion.
Okay, Keith, thank you very much. We have with us tonight 2 of the 3 members of our Housing Committee, Connie Van Egan and Virginia Clark. And I'd like to, since they've been discussing this, it would be foolish of us not to make use of their discussions. Connie or Virginia, would you like to contribute to this discussion? If you're trying to speak, you're muted.
Hi there, Jay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I see Virginia's on camera as well. I don't have any comments prepared, and I wondered if Virginia would like to lead. If you have comments, Virginia?
Well, I don't know that I should make a lot of comments since I'm on the Planning Commission as well. The Planning Commission hasn't taken an actual position on this. So, Connie, if you want to go ahead, go right ahead.
I can say that the Housing Committee has not taken a position on this. It is one of half a dozen different options that we looked at earlier in the year that were presented to the Select Board, and that we are curious about what the options are in the town and are more in listening and research mode. This is early days for us, and we would need to and with direction definitely from the Select Board and the community, we'd want to understand as much as Keith O'Warren has just done. We'd want to understand much more before we, I think, venture to an opinion. So we're, I think, present and listening, but we don't have a statement to make as the Housing Committee.
Okay. Then I'd like to give members of the Select Board a chance to comment, and I'm going to just try to be brief. Now that I visualize this, and I have in my mind's eye what the recreation group did with their plan, I feel very strongly that the point of the ARPA survey was to represent what the town wanted from its ARPA dollars. And a big part of that was recreation. Some people did ask for more housing, but that is much more of a, would take much more money than we've got in the ARPA bucket if the town was going to proceed on its own. When I look at this map and I say, okay, well, to maintain that as a softball field with the dimensions that we saw on the earlier map, it would be very difficult to fit anything else on there if we took this much land for parking and housing. And I think that there's a lot to be said for what the recreation group put together. So I'm inclined, with tears in my eyes, to say maybe this is not the optimal site for housing and move on, but that doesn't mean that we need to stop looking. One point that should be made is this is not the basket that all our eggs have to be in. Recent changes in regulations and laws at the state level allow much greater density, infill structures, accessory dwellings, and our planning commission has been making changes as well to support that. And I think we might be able to have potentially just as big an impact in terms of the number of housing units if we just really work with people to educate them on what they can do in that regard. But that's just my 2 cents. I'm just going to go on the table and then call on the people online. David, do you have a thought?
I have a lot of thoughts. The affordable housing project has so many layers. That's a big building with small units. I need some convincing to be persuaded that this would work well.
Okay.
Well, I guess I would respectfully disagree with you, Jay. It looks to me like the parking lot is about the same size as the pickleball parking lot. And it looks like instead of pickleball, we have housing. And it's about the same footprint, or a very, very close to the same footprint, that would allow to have a softball field as well. So, I'm not saying that this should go ahead. I'm not saying that this would cost us money either. That if the only way to do, as I understand it, the only way to do affordable housing is to work with an affordable housing developer. An organization like Champlain Housing Trust, Cathedral Square, or Evernorth. Those are the 3 that I'm aware of. We have examples of those kinds of housing in Richmond. Richmond Terrace is Cathedral Square, as I understand it, and Borden Street is Champlain Housing Trust, I believe. So we have examples of that in town. The increased density that the state is encouraging us to do in the village, to my mind, is not mutually exclusive. It's additive to this, and I don't see this as a green light. I see this as a yellow light, as Bart is,
You got to pay him to use that term.
And I'm not willing to give it up.
Okay. Lisa, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm wrong, but let me throw it out there anyway. We seem to be picking at affordable housing piece by piece without any context to consider the whole. And we don't really have, I don't think we have a plan going forward for affordable housing. Whatever the state has told us that needs to be done is not enough, I think, for an actual plan. So we look at Brown's Court, we go, could we put affordable housing there? Well, maybe. Should we? I don't know. What I'd like to know is the answer to the question, what other alternatives are there? And we don't know. So we're going to always have that problem when we come to affordable housing or Plan B, affordable housing or Plan C. We are not really going to be able to answer that question until we have some kind of approach, a holistic approach to what we want for affordable housing and how we want to achieve affordable housing. Do we want it to be mixed in with neighborhoods? Do we want it out on its own? Do we want it close to services of the village? I would think so, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, all kinds of questions. So whether Brown's Court is suitable for affordable housing or not, I don't think we can even answer it. And of course, the survey has a lot to do with it too. We do need that.
Right.
So those are my thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to call on Bard next. Bard.
So I've sort of pushed the discussion, I think, of this issue. And I don't have an opinion whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. A lot of ideas, in my opinion, reside in the yellow light for a while. There are competing goods here. So I'll just say that seems obvious to me. Then none of these suggestions, conversations are bad or poorly intended. It is absolutely clear to me that housing is a pressing issue. Is this the right place? I don't know. Maybe not. There are a bunch of things to deal with. Having gone up to this field many times back in the day, over 10 years ago, back then it was kind of random. Where did people park? All over the place. They parked on the side of the field. They parked at the edge of the field over to the left. They parked sometimes on the street. So when I think about it, it's a field that sort of has sat there used for multiple reasons and multiple purposes by multiple people over 100 years. And so calling the question of what do we envision for it is a good but challenging question and discussion to have, in my opinion. If I were going to think about how we could take some momentum from this, it's my observation that we are all challenged by this question of housing and affordable housing. Other states, you can't make this, or other cities, towns, you can't make this up. Shelburne was on the front page of the news, the Burlington Free Press today, for anyone who still reads a paper. And they have some affordability requirements of like 15%. And then when you hit a certain threshold, 33%. There's absolutely tension between the town and developers over that. It would appear to me from the tone of the article that the town thinks that they own the issue and can push developers. I don't know that that's true. This developer was pushing back. So how this plays out, I don't know. And maybe a way to be positive from this is to use it as a springboard for, if not here, where, what are our opportunities and what are we going to do about it for a range of housing options, affordable, defined different ways, in our town to be part of the solution for the inadequate number of housing units. And it does feel to me like we're a little stuck between all the different groups. And so maybe we could consider using this as a springboard for more of a like housing summit across Planning Commission, Housing Committee, Select Board, others, about what the options are and what the town's role might be in facilitating that. It's probably most central to the Planning Commission, but it's a challenging nut to crack, and it might benefit to have involvement of others along the way.
Okay, Bard, thank you. Thank all of you for speaking. There was a mention in the chat of a question I think is worth at least sharing. A question that I had but failed to state, a question I had but failed to voice was, if we take that parking there for the residents, where do people using the ball field park? Are we looking at a double decker or parking under the apartment building? Obviously, this is just a back of the envelope thing, and there is no answer to that, but that would be something we'd have to consider. I'd like to, I'm not seeing hands up in the Zoom. I do see Jeff has his hand up. Jeff, by all means, go ahead.
Well, why don't we hear from Denise first? I've already spoken.
Denise? Oh, I'm so sorry. I couldn't see your hand.
Denise Barnard. I used to serve on the Richmond Terrace Board when we turned it over to Cathedral Square Corp. I'm not familiar with Evermore, but I am, familiar with Cathedral Square and Champlain Housing Trust. And when they do a project, they need to own the property because that's how they get their federal funding. And they go from a very long list of people that have been waiting for housing. So I just want to make a point that it won't be our residents most likely that will be moving into this housing. And the second thing I wanted to say was, would they own the whole ball field or just where the buildings are and the parking lot is?
Jeff?
So I think these are all good questions, and I'm not the right one to answer them. It seems to me that the survey is really important. My understanding of what is it, Act 47?
147.
147.
I believe.
Is that it requires us to come up with zoning at 5 units per acre. And so if this were 4 acres, we could get 20 units. That's where the
No, I
20,
think I'm wrong.
that's where the number came from. And my understanding is that that's the minimum number that most affordable housing developers want to consider. I really like Bard's idea. You know, this is a really important topical issue right now.
Mhm.
And it seems to me that we ought to be getting together and get on the same page and resolve this issue once and for all, but also, you know, move the other issues that are moving around town. I don't see it as being mutually exclusive with the work that the Parks Committee is doing, and I know that you have felt that, but I don't see that as being mutually exclusive necessarily. There's still 2 other parks to consider, and you've done most of the work that needs to be done as far as coming up with costs. Maybe some more, but you know, I don't see it as being mutually exclusive. So I would support the idea of having a summit with town committees and perhaps Champlain Housing Trust and Cathedral Square to answer your question, Denise, because I can't do it. It's Evernorth. Evernorth is.
I'm not familiar with them.
They used to be Housing Vermont, and now they're Evernorth. Those are the 3 that I'm aware of. And the reason why those are useful to work with is that the federal incentives for affordable housing really complicated. You know, they're tax incentives, and they have to package all of these together. My understanding is that they can reduce the cost per square foot from market rate housing to affordable housing by about half.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why it's affordable, is because there are enough subsidies to reduce the construction costs.
For 30 years.
Right. So, you know, I don't know whether any of that is worthwhile. I don't know. Frankly, I don't feel like I should be making that decision right now. So that's my personal opinion.
Okay. Yeah. Another question I've been asked is, how would people afford to live there? My wife actually is an accountant for the Burlington Housing Authority, which is the agency that administers. It's a quasi-governmental agency in that their paychecks say City of Burlington, but in most other respects, they're very much like Champlain Housing Trust. And as it happens, my wife is the one who processes all the federal payments for rent, Section 8 and so forth. And it's the majority of what pays the rent there. So there is a lot of federal money out there, not just for building, but just for continuing to occupy that. These would be small units. You know, there's no denying that. And that's the case with many Burlington Housing Authority properties. They have, it's a little sad, but they have some 2-bedroom units that have 14 people living in them. But that beats the heck out of living in a park under a tarp. And I think that, you know, even if we did this, I don't think this is enough, because this is, you know, everybody needs a place to live. And what happens when these 20 units are full? That's barely going to make a dent in the demand. So it's something that we can't build something and say we're done. As Jeff has been saying, I think as a number of people have said, it's something that needs to be a long-term priority. John, you've got your hand up.
Sure. I think someone pointed this out on Front Porch Forum, and it resonated with me, and I'm going to repeat it here. As far as this not being mutually exclusive with the other parks in town, I don't believe we're allowed to do any more development on those parks. I don't think we could build a pickleball court. They're all in the floodway. We couldn't do a bocce court. It's in the floodway. We couldn't have any additional parking. It's in the floodway. This is the only place that I'm aware of that the town has that they can build any of that.
John, thank you for bringing that up. I actually asked Keith that very question, whether we could build. You're right. The flood zoning basically says the current footprint is the current footprint, and you can't build anything outside its current footprint. You can't do this, you can't do that. So I said, well, okay, could we do bocce courts and Volunteers Green? They're not a structure per se, they're flat. And Keith said, I'm not sure, but I'll check. So Keith, were you able to find anything out about that?
Yeah, Tyler was tasked with that, and I'm not sure if he's still on or not. But what we're looking for is
I am Keith, if you'd like me to speak on it.
Okay, yeah, 1 second. What we have done is we've sent a description of what we want to do within the floodplain to Kyle Madash, who is our coordinator with the state. And I don't believe we've received anything else. We've received anything back from him on that. Both Tyler and I have been brainstorming on how can we, for lack of a better term, and it's not a planning term, is shoehorn this in zoning wise, because we know the need, we see the need, but we have to interpret this stuff literally. Tyler, I'll turn this over to you. I'm not sure where you are with Kyle on this. I assume that nothing has happened, so floor is yours.
Yeah, that's correct, Keith. I haven't heard anything back from Kyle about this. And to be fair, I'm with this trying to go this route, I'm stretching these regs about as far as I think I can reasonably stretch them and still be able to hang my hat and say that I'm literally interpreting the regulations. So basically, I'm kind of using the strictness of our regulations actually to our advantage in some way. So section 6.8 of the Richmond zoning definitions, regulations in the floodplain specific definitions define structure as an assembly of material for occupancy or use, including but not limited to a building, mobile home, trailer, sign, wall, fence, etc., etc. So basically, you can make an argument if you stack two rocks on top of each other in Richmond that would count as a structure if you intend to use it for something. So, and I don't say that to be glib, but it's written very, very broadly. So where that's most of the problematic for most of the time, if you go to 6.8.9, which notes like permitted uses and allowed uses in the floodway, you'll notice that almost everything in the floodway is prohibited. Right. So like new accessory structures, new principal structures, new temporary structures, whole host of things. But you are allowed to do substantial improvements to existing structures with conditional use. And that kind of gave me the idea of what if we view not the individual pieces of the field, like bleachers and like the backstop or like the buildings as structures in and of themselves, but the ball fields themselves, the entirety of the field itself as a structure, right? So much the same way as, you know, doors and windows and, you know, roofs are parts of a house, right? If you, the backstop, dugouts, some bleachers, the fence, if we can view those as part of a structure that we could call a sports field, right? That we could then do a substantial improvement to the structure, which is an allowed use in the floodplain. Like I said, I'm stretching this about as far as I think I could reasonably go and still be literally interpreting the regulations. And my thought process to this is similar to kind of Denise's presentation helped me solidify the idea a little bit more, and how they were able to like clearly draw that structure on there with the outlines of like the dugouts and everything else like that. It's like, what if we could do that and I could, you know, get the state to kind of go along with it and see if they have any problems with it. I would be willing to explore that from a zoning standpoint and being, okay, we're going to call these, there would have to be a lot of work to do this, mind you, but say, okay, we'll call the soccer fields, the baseball fields, a couple other things structures, will then allow us the ability to go through the development review board, through conditional use review, to potentially upgrade these structures. Again, I do think it's trying to somewhat circumventing the spirit of these, which is to, you don't want to put stuff in the floodplain because it is guaranteed to flood again, particularly in the floodway. So that is a risk that if we do this, we put all that investment, time, and money down there to build this stuff, and if it all washes away, it is what it is to a certain extent, right? But I'm willing, I think it's, you know, taking my zoning hat off, it's a great resource for the town. I've actually used a playground down there myself having my wife and son come down to visit me while I'm at work sometimes. It's a great thing to have that the town has. You know, it's just so if I can figure out a way to help us use it, I will, but I do have to, putting my zoning hat back on, I have to interpret the regulations literally, and they are very strict. So I'm doing the best I can with it. I still don't know if this is going to work, but I'm willing to run it down and see if it will.
Okay, so to ask I understand about conceivably upgrading the courts that are there, the fields that are there, but in terms of can we put in pickleball courts there? Did you answer that and maybe I just overlooked it?
So essentially this is where the downside to this interpretation is, right? So I can only kind of use what's there, right? I got to reasonably be able to see, like, you know, how much can I get away with kind of using this interpretation to a certain extent? Like, I think I could reasonably flex it enough to be like, okay, we could maybe put some bleachers down by the base field if the state would go along with this. I don't know about putting new infrastructure down there because, again, it's that term structure. So if there wasn't pickleball courts down there before and it's not directly attached to something that's down there, it's going to be hard for me just to permit new structures down there.
Right. I imagine it's not the court alone, it's also the fencing.
Yeah, it's an assembly of materials. That's kind of what it is. It's that broad. So
yeah.
And fencing makes sense because fencing is easily damaged.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Kara.
Thank you. I've been taking notes and I want to make sure I understand what you were saying earlier, Jeff, when the discussion is to understand all of our potential opportunities for affordable housing and housing projects, and that we're going to consider Brown Core on the list, but not the only thing on the list. And that I don't know if it was Jay's idea to have a comprehensive a meeting of a summit to talk about this. Was it Bard? I'm sorry. Okay, Bard. It was Bard. To have a summit of everything, but I want to make sure I understood you, Jeff. When you said there are other parks to consider, were you talking about other parks to consider for housing, like Round Church Park could be considered for housing? Or what were you saying that other parks, I mean, we know we can't do volunteers green with housing, but if we're going to look at housing spaces that are available, I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand that you weren't talking about housing at Round Church Park.
Correct. I was not talking about housing in front of the round church. That was not something that I was proposing. What I was suggesting is that the Parks Committee is looking at more than just Browns Court for recreational opportunities. And now, so it was in the context of recreation, not housing.
Okay, because we were talking about housing, so I wanted to make sure I was not hearing that incorrectly, and to make it clear. But it potentially, if we're looking at using green space for housing, could be considered.
You know, I don't think anybody would propose doing housing at
just like I'm not proposing to do housing at Browns Court. I want to be clear that Kara LaBounty does not support doing housing in any of our green space parks.
Okay. But I think we can all agree we've got a housing crisis, and no one person here has a magic bullet. Patty.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I support this idea of a housing summit. I think there's lots of things that we could learn. One of the things that I've been learning about is this idea of, the reason that Burlington does this 15%, where, developers have to commit 15% of their development, anything over 10 units, I think it is, has to be affordable housing. Part of that, I think, is because they want a diversity of socioeconomic groups living together instead of this older idea of segregating people, economically. And that's not necessarily doesn't have great outcomes. So I think there's a lot of things that we don't know. I think we just have preconceived notions of how things have been in the past and what we think I think this idea of a housing summit would be excellent. The other thing I wanted to say is, if we're going to spend $100,000 on pickleball courts, I don't think I want to put it down in the floodplain. I think that's not a great idea. That investment would be in tough shape. But I do think that the softball field could potentially go down and volunteer green. I know that that kind of will mess with people's heads, but that in terms of when things flood, a ball field, it seems like those got rehabilitated pretty quickly. I don't think that it's quite the magnitude of like a tennis court or a pickleball court. So potentially that softball field might, maybe in the future isn't up at Brown's Court. Maybe it's pickleball and bocce ball and, potentially integrated sort of housing economically. That's all.
I'm going to call on people in the following order: Lisa, Chuck, Morgan, and Fran. Before I call on them, though, I just want to say a couple points. We're hearing that in terms of building any net new recreational facilities, volunteers green is not really an option because floodwaters would destroy the fences that we would build around the pickleball courts. One of the things we're hoping to have happen would be that we could have a softball field, pickleball courts, and housing. And I'm not seeing that working, but then again, we haven't had it surveyed. So I think a survey is going to come first. A second thing, and again, I am going to call on people, I haven't forgotten, is that one criterion about the ARPA money is we have to have it allocated by 2024. We do have a tendency to kick cans down the road for a very long time. 2024 is 2 weeks away. And it may be that at some point we have to fish or cut bait in order to get the money, that we lose the money if we don't allocate it. But that doesn't mean that we can't keep investigating housing. Finally, if we are going to have a housing summit, I think it's a great idea. It's going to have to involve some people from the developer community, because it's great to write position papers saying, wouldn't it be nice if people did this, but not involve the people who would be in a position to do it. Okay, Lisa, Chuck, Morgan, then Fran, and then if we can, perhaps we should move on.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, listen, something that would speed up the whole affordable housing question, I think, is a poll of the business community for what kind of workers they can't get or would they want if they could get them, who can't live within a reasonable driving distance or don't have a car, can't get here for a job. How many workers are they not employing that they think they could employ if those people could live locally? Maybe it's 3. I don't know. Maybe it's 50. We need to know some kind of parameter around the size of the affordable housing market. And I don't think any developer can really do that for us either. This is our town. Let's get the pulse of our town, turn the business community loose, say, here, fill these out. If you had employees, just the way you wanted them, what would you pay them? How many would you want? And how often would you want them employed? And then we'll start getting some bones we can put this, the rest of the flesh on. So just my thought.
Hey, Lisa, I'm going to add to that. The town of Morrisville actually made a major push in terms of what they refer to as workforce housing for exactly the reason you're talking about. They looked at the fact that there were businesses that were closing for lack of workers, industrial enterprises who were on very short staffs. And that was the lever that they used to get things built. It's not just housing is nice, but it's, if we don't have housing, we have no workforce.
Right.
And I think that's something that we would do well to remember and to remind people of.
It's the thing that people who are already here, living here, don't really see. And it's tough to, tough to notice that when it's not there.
Yeah. Okay, Chuck.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time for this. Couple of good options on the table. My concern, particularly with the housing, but maybe pickleball as well, is that I would think we would need to do a traffic impact study of some sort. I'm kind of picturing the morning commute to Camel's Hump, which is already quite a bottleneck. And now you're going to add 20 more residents coming out of that dead end road with no other option but to come out and go onto the Jericho Road. So that's just my thoughts.
And I think, in fact, we are obligated to do that if we get past a certain point.
We have to.
Yeah. Okay, Morgan, then Fran.
Morgan Oliver.
What is the definition of affordable housing? I'm sure somebody has that. I mean, and I point that out. I mean, it is important to understand, as somebody had said in Burlington, that any developers have to commit 15% of whatever they build to affordable housing. But yet I hear all the affordable housing companies are doing that based upon tax credits.
Right. The definition that's usually used is if you are paying more than 30% of your money,
Income.
affordable housing is generally defined, this is on HUD's website, affordable housing is generally defined as housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income for housing costs, including utilities.
So that has to be taken into consideration, but I think that the big point here is that any developments that are putting up affordable housing, they're doing that based upon Section 8 or rural development, and they're getting tax credits. And so it would seem like a real challenge just to say you're going to have to put 15% over here. I'm not sure that would work. I'm not against affordable housing. I'm just saying that that might be a complicated formula to try to get anybody on board. Instead of just saying,
You might want to read the Burlington Free Press article about, it was Shelburne, not Burlington or South Burlington, Shelburne.
right.
And it relates to, as I understand the article, I'm not an expert on Shelburne zoning regulation, but as I understand it, it's an obligation for a percentage of affordable units for developments of a certain size. And this was, I think Patty made the comment earlier, because it's intended to be inclusive and integrated, as opposed to, if everybody knows what Cabrini Green was,
Oh, yeah.
it's huge buildings filled with poor people, and you go, what could go wrong? Well, we watched it for about 30 years and watched all sorts of horrible things.
Cabrini Green is a very educational example. If people here have not read it, go on Wikipedia. Cabrini Green they're gone. They were the worst housing units you've ever imagined in Chicago, and we definitely don't need those here. Fran.
Couple of things. I have been a proponent of affordable housing down on Railroad Street, and I actually lost an election because I was a proponent of that project. And I feel that the town got burned on that project because we are not getting paid back the money that was given to them in the grant, and that we were going to get back over time to be used to create other projects. So I am hesitant about that kind of project. But when you look at what Keith did with, there's this rectangle of a green and parking, that isn't all the area that an apartment building really needs. If you go to Richmond Terrace, out in back, there's some green space where people can have gardens. Out in front is some landscaping. So that really would take away a lot of the space up at Browns Court, when you could not really have a ball field. They just wouldn't mesh. So I still think, here we are. You're having this discussion. Where is our committee going to go?
Right, that is the question. I would like to encourage you to proceed forward because, well, I mean, I've already spoken on this. I think there are some real challenges to using that property for housing, but I think a lot of it we need the survey, no matter what we do. And Bard what's the phrase, Bard, you like to use about letting things simmer? Season. Could you go ahead? Yeah. Bard's fond of saying let things season. Now, we don't want to season forever because I just said we've got a limit. We've got to get the money allocated. And I don't want to be dismissive of the amount of work that the committee's put in. So I don't want to lose that. So Jeff.
How can we take this next step? I thought the suggestion for a summit of some sort is a good one. I think that we do have some time constraints. I think doing that in January, once we put the budget to bed tonight, I hope, it might be, an open window for us to do that. How would we move that forward?
Okay. That's a good
Someone
question.
would never get you any kind of an answer very quickly. I mean, I participated in multiple charrettes. We spent all day, blue skying, can we do this? Can we do that? And then you know, a year later, nothing has happened. You're still in limbo. I think you can have, a summit is not going to solve whether we go forward at Brownsport or not.
You know, I think I disagree whether it will have a definitive answer, but what I do think is that I don't know. You know, I cannot say one way or the other for the information I have in front of me, whether this is possible or not. You know, I think I feel like a lay person trying to make a decision on this, and I would rather have people who know how to do this say, you know, this is a crazy idea. You can't do it. You know,
You're not going to get that kind of an answer in January. That's a 6-month job.
Okay. So I would like to ask the Parks, you have a much longer name, of the Parks Committee to continue down the road you're going, and we will work on getting a surveyor in place. And I'd like to let Bard have the last word, and then I think we should move on for now to our next agenda item. So Bard, go ahead.
Lucky me. Thank you. So one of the things I'd say is probably frustrating to people. So I often don't make up my mind until I've actually heard people say a lot about something. And I know it's increasingly popular to walk into the room with your mind made up about things. But hopefully one of my strengths is that I don't, that I contemplate different sides, and letting it season sometimes evolves, like in the shower in the morning kinds of things. So I'll just say that's how I approach this and why I think, you know, it merits some thought. And Fran, I think you raise a good point that just having a meeting, call a bunch of people together, we get another white paper. That's sort of what I'm thinking is our challenge, that you have people take bites at it and then they walk away from it because it's complicated. So one thing I think we might contemplate in a future meeting is summit, including perhaps a contractor or consultant at modest fees that helps lead us through that to something actionable. Because we have lots of reports on the table and the shelf that say, you got this problem, you got this problem. And I think focus on, is there anything actionable, or what are the actionable things? Because the Planning Commission is dealing with a bunch of things that are actionable, that create incentives or disincentives for certain kinds of development behavior. But beyond that, and how to support the Planning Commission in that, are there other ideas that haven't come up yet?
Okay, well, I want to thank all participants on both the issues we've looked at tonight, recreation and housing, for their thoughtful and enlightening comments and points of view. I think we heard a lot of good stuff, and I wish we could do all the options, but unfortunately that's not how this world works. So we are going to need to make some decisions in the relatively near future, but we do need to get some board data first, including a survey. I'm going to move on now to our third item. Well, I don't know, is it third item on our select board agenda? This will be a relatively quick topic, I would suspect. This has to do with our radar speed signs. Many people have noticed that they, how should we say this, aren't working. We paid for a number of new speed radar signs that would allow us to download data, so we'd be able to estimate how fast people were really going, and also use that data to help with speed studies and justify whether a lower speed should be required. And they tend to go dark either because their batteries are dead or because of other problems. And Duncan Wardwell was able to get a technician from a company called Cmte. And if you want to bring up his surveys, I don't know if Duncan is still with us. He was, but okay, there's an item in the packet that is basically detailing for each of our 6 radar signs, or actually one of them is flashing lights, but still, what's going on with them and what we're doing next. And we're bringing that up now.
Duncan, are you still here?
I have it up if you want to, or there it is.
I got it up. I just wanted to see if you wanted to speak to this, since he did. He's been doing the research.
If he suddenly surfaces, Duncan, you're welcome to go, but otherwise, there's a list down below at the bottom that actually details what these signs are. We've got radar north of the elementary school and
Yes,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I see him, but maybe he's.
Duncan, you are there?
Yes, sorry, I got
Okay.
kicked off right at the wrong time. I've been waiting for the show time.
Okay, well, Duncan, you talk.
Yeah, there's not much to say other than I was able to meet with a technician from TMDE, and we walked around to all the different radar signs. A lot of them had some failed batteries that we need to replace. The one number 2 is sorry, not number 3 is also having to deal with a new panel. Once again, it's I got recent information from some of the newer signs we put up on Cochrane Road, and the recommendation is we can actually do a smart charger that might help deal with the solar panels not getting charged all the time. So we'd connect them up to AC and then get the DC from the solar. But that's kind of where I'm at. I'm waiting for the technician to get back to me of when he can replace the batteries in the sign.
Okay, Jeff?
So what AC would you hook it up to? This is in the middle of nowhere.
No, actually, most of our signs are kind of next to poles. I haven't looked into it that much detail, but they're not like far from an electrical pole.
But even if it's a pole, wouldn't you need to meter it, and then wouldn't that be problematic?
It's pretty much all problematic in terms of how we solve it, of what's the best solution. The basic system right now is it's not getting enough sunlight, from what I can understand from the technicians and everyone who's looked at it. So we have to look at some other solution.
Just to follow up a little bit, we followed up with Chief Cambridge about it, and he said that he's done some research on these signs over his years, and he's found that you really got to look at a number of different options to get one that really works. Because the initial feedback that Duncan got from this company was, well, that's sort of what happens in the Northeast when there's not a lot of sun. So I asked him to look in, like, what other options are there? What would it cost to hook it up to power? Is that a good option for us? Are there other signs out there that might run better on solar? I don't know, but maybe there are a few other ones. We're also looking in, so we did buy 4 new signs. We put 2 in this summer on Cochrane Road. The permitting process for the state to put 2 in on Route 2 is taking a lot longer than I would have liked. Part of that was my fault, not getting back to them quickly. But those are still sitting unopened. So we're asking, can we return these? Because there might be a better option there. The other ones that are out, we'll ask about those too. They've been out for a few months. They're not really meeting expectations, as we all know. But Duncan is helping to try to chase a number of these options down. So yeah, the direct power is something that we do need a lot more information about. We don't know what it would cost to hook up. How do you meter it? Is that even the best of our other alternatives that are out there?
The 2 that we have that are still boxed up, are those the ones that we got with the blue strobe lights that we were told we can't use because we can't use blue strobe lights?
Correct. They're the same model as the ones that are on either end of Cochrane Road, facing as you enter into Cochrane Road. And yes, they have the strobes that he reviewed MUT, the rules of the road. It says you can't use the blue strobe lights because it's distracting, I guess.
I definitely support getting, sending those back, and in my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, it makes sense to me that this time of year, there might not be enough sunlight.
Right.
Especially on days like today. Yeah, particularly on day, well, like this year, maybe.
Yeah.
But some of it's gonna be sighting. You don't want to park, site it underneath a tree or whatever. It is a difficult place because it's a valley.
Yeah.
So that's gonna restrict the amount of sunlight. And I don't know if that was taken into consideration when we chose the sites, is the solar orientation?
Not as much. We were more looking at where do we need them to be.
The one on your Jonesville Bridge was put facing the wrong way. The solar panels were facing north.
So this doesn't surprise me. There's a solar lights in front for the high school, where you cross the road and go over to the ball field over at the high school. And the solar
Okay.
panels are facing opposite directions, you know, and it, you know,
Well, how hard would it be to site the solar panels and put batteries where they could be accessible and swap batteries every week or so?
I don't know.
They did mention that when I spoke to them too, we did notice a lot of the solar panels are pointed in the wrong direction. You can't really get replacement batteries. They don't suggest that. They just suggest that smart charger where you hook it up to once again, I don't know the details on how much it would cost, but that seems like our better detail of being in that valley and on Cochrane Road. By my house, there's not a good place you're going to put that sign where it's going to get sun. I know that spot pretty well. It doesn't get sun.
So Duncan, can we run an orange extension cord into your house?
Yes, I'm all up for that. We'll do that. I've got a contracted rate for that though.
Okay, Morgan?
Can we use the town Tesla to juice it up?
Okay, Kara?
Another good use for it.
I've been really after you guys for the past 6 months since you got these signs to return them. I really want to thank Duncan for taking the time, but I'm really apologizing to you, Duncan, because I think this has been a big waste of your time. These things haven't worked from the beginning. Whether we're going to talk about it 6 months later, that the angle of the solar panels weren't right that should have been looked at from the very beginning. This is taxpayer dollars that have been wasted, and we should have got our money back because it's a product that's not working correctly. And it's wasting a lot of your energy and the town managers and the assistant town managers' time to deal with this when there could be other solutions for slowing traffic. These were a try. You tested them. They did not work. You've got 6 on this list that are not working, that do not work routinely are not working. And I really want to stop wasting our time. I don't think we should plug these into a telephone pole or run an extension cord to Duncan's house. I don't find that funny when we're talking about affordable housing and it matters what we spend our money on. So please take this seriously and get them returned.
Okay, thank you, Kara. I'd like to note that one of these is not actually a radar sign, it is a set of flashing lights. But other than that.
Yeah, and that's a flashing light to alert people to the crosswalk at the school, which I added to the list because as Duncan and I drove around looking at these signs, we noted that that isn't always working. And I think our first priority is these signs, try to figure out why that, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't flash. I don't know the methodology or rhyme or reason behind that, but we literally put it on the list, try to figure it out.
Slightly off topic, did we figure out why the crosswalk out here stays functioning?
It occasionally, I think, there's something mechanical. Pete is aware that occasionally it phases out. He's able to usually pretty quickly get in there and correct that. Like Pete understands how that works better than any of us understand how the radar speed feedback sign works.
Who installed the radar feedback signs?
I think Pete might have done the actual installation after Ben purchased them, Chief Herrick. And that's part of the problem too, that Duncan and I were talking about last week. There really hasn't been an owner of the sign per se. They were purchased by Chief Herrick. They were installed by Pete. Now it's sort of falling in Duncan's lap of like, well, no one else has been able to figure it out. Like, what do we do now? So I think we might be able to work with Chief Cambridge, because I think he's got some history with this and some experience, and he might be able to come in and say, oh, here's a more easy solution. So
I'd like to suggest though, since I don't have access to the original bid or purchase order or contract, whatever documentation we legally signed with these companies to buy these, that in the future, any such signs we buy include service. Decatur sold us the signs and then there was no provision for ongoing service. It was here you go. Ian.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I think you may have just answered the question that Kara asked, but can you return them? And will you?
I asked Duncan to reach out to the company. We gotta reach out to them and find out, like, hey, we haven't put these up. We don't have an answer back on that yet, but I think assuming we can return the two that are completely unused, I think it makes sense to return them because they're clearly not performing the way we need them to.
Yes, I would totally agree with getting those sent back as soon as we can.
Yep. And, and I would like to take town staff off the hook a little bit. We have been under transition with our police department for a few years now. This past year has been extraordinarily difficult for town staff with many, many more pressing issues than the speed sign. Not that speeding on Cochrane Road is not an important issue. But we've had floods, now multiple floods in the same year. We've had issues with different the different town departments. This is an annoying issue, and it's not the only thing that we've been trying to do with Cochrane Road. So, yes, I think it's a failure, but I don't blame our town staff for that failure, and I do think we should move on.
Well, yeah, it's a failure, but with everything in life, you try something that doesn't always work the first time. We have information now that might make these work.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
So, yeah, I think the ones that are still in the box, we should try to return, certainly not take them out of the box, but I think we should try to make these, they're already installed, work.
Right. And if we ever do buy any more, like I said, I absolutely want to see a service contract be part of the purchase. And also a lemon. I mean, as Bard's been fond of saying, if these were cars, they would have been, they would have come out, or did you say that?
Lemon law.
One of you is fond of pointing out the lemon law thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Lisa, let's finish up with you. You're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Gotcha. These signs work in a lot of places and they can't be that complicated. They should be able to work. The company needs to make them work. And at that point, it's a lot cheaper than having a police officer sitting out there with nothing to do for 8 hours a day, maybe to catch a speeder. We better charge a lot for that ticket to get the money back. So we have to make an effort to reduce the speeding. It's a moral imperative and it's also a safety issue. So, we got to do that for our people. That's what we're for. So we got to make these things work because it's the most economical option when they work. So I can't prove that they reduce speed, but you know what? And it flashes. I think any driver will look at the number and then they can't say they didn't know. So if they do get pulled over, then, okay, you're speeding.
And if they're working, that gives us valuable data to use in speed studies.
Exactly right. That's the other way. Right. We draw lines, we, set speed limits down, up, whatever. Yeah, exactly. That's the data. That's where you start. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick comment is, I know this is throwing maybe good money at bad, but have the solar panel outputs been evaluated in order to keep up with charging the batteries? I mean, there is a fact of you have to quadruple the surface area of solar panels, but comment, that's all.
Okay. We're going to move on to our next item on the agenda, which does require motions. It's 2 access permits. They're both in your packet. Road foreman Pete Goslin has reviewed and approved both these permits. The first one is for address 1330 Jericho Road. It currently exists as an access to a hunting camp. The owners are seeking approval to allow this access to access a house.
Correct.
And information about this permit is in your packet. If you want to bring that up or
Yeah, the map on this one was not the greatest, but as you mentioned, it's an existing access. It goes up to a hunting camp. They're gonna put a house up there, so they need permission to upgrade that to a different use from a hunting camp to a house.
Where's Jericho Road on that?
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. This map is not great. Pete went up and looked at it. He knows right where it is. He looked at the sight lines. Actually, the applicant might be here with us. I see somebody just unmuted. That might be Alan, you just turned your video on, I think. Is this your access permit?
It says Jay McCormick.
Well, okay, then maybe not. So that's what I know about this. Pete's looked at it. He says the sightlines are fine. It's existing. They're looking to update it to a house rather than just a hunting camp.
Jay, this is David. I move to approve access permit 2023-04 for 1330 Jericho Road.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion from David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford to approve access permit 2023-04 for 1330 Jericho Road. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
This is David, I.
Bard, aye.
Lisa, I.
And Jay, aye. Our second access permit of 2 is for 854 Kenyon Road. This is for access to a lot created by a subdivision. Information on this is also in your packet, and Josh is bringing it up right here.
Yes, this one's a little bit better map. Yeah, this is a subdivision, so this is access to the new lot that's been created by that subdivision for the single family home that's gonna go on that lot. Again, as Jay mentioned, Pete's reviewed this. He approved it for the line of sight and the culvert that's there.
Jay, this is David. I move to approve access permit 2023-05 for 854 Kenyon Road.
Oh, this is Jeff. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to approve access permit 2023-05 for 854 Kenyon Road. Motion was made by David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Forward.
So, I'd like to understand a little bit better where this is.
So this is where we got signatures.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This is where Joyce Levesque's cat house used to be,
Oh, yeah.
right there.
Okay.
You want me to pull it up on a map?
Joyce
It's
Levesque one.
probably a
The
better
house where she
structure.
housed your cats.
Oh,
Not the other.
Yeah, no.
As soon as I said that, I was like, no.
Felines, felines.
You can pull up, here's a map. It looks like it's, yeah, it's started down by the S turns by Chamberlain.
Literally,
Where did it
yes.
go? There it is.
Yes.
So it's on the north end of Kenyon Road. This is not the greatest map, but you can see it's closer
Yeah,
towards the
usually
Route
maps
2
use
area.
Google Maps.
Yeah, I would have. I just did something quick.
And
Sorry.
I meant nothing
There it is.
snarky, but Joyce always referred to that house.
it's literally right across from your house.
It is.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Is this where the mudslide occurred today? Or,
It's across the street.
It's right in this, I got it. It's right in this area, right?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of coming up this slope here,
This is actually about here, the mudslide was right.
down in this area.
Yeah.
okay, it's across the road, across Kenyon from them. The reason I was asking is if this site is contributing to that mudslide, then they have something they need to fix before we give them approval.
No,
Okay.
I didn't see any accesses near the mudslide. It's kind of a steep embankment that goes into the ditch and it slid. I think up here is the rock quarry up here, David?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that.
There was a house there a few years ago that was
Yeah.
torn down.
Okay, the water probably pooled up there and came out. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay, well, we have a motion made by David Sanders, no, made by Jeff, seconded by David, right? Do I have that backward?
The other way around.
Other way around. David made the motion and Jeff seconded it to approve the access permit for 854 Kenyon Road. Please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay, our last really sizable item, I would guess, although some of the others certainly will deserve some discussion, such as the salamander item. In consideration of finalizing the fiscal year 25 budget to be considered for approval by the voters at town meeting. The reason we did not finish the drafting at our last budget meeting a week ago was because there were still some questions that we needed answers to. And Josh has included answers to some of those questions in the packet. I would like to just note before I pass the ball to Josh that what happened today with flooding, which hopefully will not have wrecked too many roads, or damaged houses or any of that, is always a possibility. You know, severe floods are a thing. And we did spend $464,000, give or take, on that we would not have otherwise spent but for the July floods. And that is money that in a normal year might have been used to lower taxes or, well, to be probably used to lower taxes, but we can't because it was spent on flood damage. And that's just an unfortunate thing. We have, because of police vacancy savings over the last few years, generally had enough funds unspent at the end of the year to use for deferring taxes. This will not be the case this year, although we will have enough funding from reimbursement by the state, reimbursement by FEMA, unusually high amounts of interest gained from our bank accounts, that we will hopefully be able to keep the increase to no more than 5%. And it's still possible, depending on how things work out, that between now and the time that the tax rate must be set, that we might be able to lower it still further. Josh and I had a brief discussion today about what happens if, after we bring the budget to the voters and the voters approve it or approve a subsequent budget, if we then realize that we have enough money in vacancy savings from the last quarter, that had we known we'd have that we could have used it to lower taxes. Can we retroactively say, oh? And that's a question that neither Josh nor I actually really knew the answer to. So Josh, do you want to comment on that?
I guess not much, other than I think it's a good idea to look into, because right now we're still 6 months away from the end of this fiscal year. So by the time the select board sets the tax rate in July, could we look at that and calculate that, oh, we have an extra 100,000, we'll set it lower, knowing that we would raise 100,000 less in taxes, knowing that we had some savings from the last fiscal year. Right now, the way the tax rate's been set is once the budget's voted, there's a set expense, there's a set revenue budget, and the only thing that really has ever changed is we look at the current grand list, and then we set the grand list set the tax rate on that grand list to raise the amount that was stated in the budget. But I don't know if you can deliberately underfund knowing you have other unassigned funds. We have to find that out, but it's a good question to take a look at, because the more real time that we can go with, maybe the better.
Yeah, it may ultimately turn out to be kind of a harebrained idea, but we do know that each year we've found under the bush, like, oh, here's more vacancy savings, and we don't have a crystal ball to know that in advance. Incidentally, for those of you wondering about my references to police vacancy savings, we have another thing to mention is that we have annually budgeted for a fully staffed police department, only to not have one, and then to have money left over. This year, we discussed 4 different models for how to estimate the likely salary costs of the department. And we decided to go with a model that would involve 4 full-time police officers, but a contracted chief, instead of assuming that we're going to have to budget a full salary and benefits for a full-time chief. Our goal is to try to have less money found under the sofa cushions each year by budgeting more accurately. Now, there are a number of other things that were in the memo regarding new information received since last week, and I'd like to hush up now and let Josh go over that.
Okay. So I'll share my screen so we can kind of walk through. So yeah, I think last week we got to a spot that was pretty close to final. So in this version of the budget, what I've done is gone through and highlighted items in yellow that we changed based on the feedback from last meeting. Really, we'll start here in the police department. As Jay mentioned, we've been sort of keeping this flat line in the budget proposals, but we looked at 3 or 4 different versions of what we could do with the police department. The version that was settled on, as Jay just mentioned, was for hiring 4 officers and contracting for a chief. So we put that budget into this budget here for the police. We did carve out the cell phones, as we have been doing in other departments, to take that out of the telephone and internet and just look at that separately. We also put in $15,840 for Williston Community Justice based on the request from Williston. It currently fully funds anything not covered by the grant. So we added that in as a new one. The one question that we had, as Connie and I reviewed it, is Chief Cambridge had asked, could he have a line for public relations to buy things like candy for Halloween, small giveaways for kids? He was looking for about $1,500 there. So I put that in there as a discussion point for the board tonight. If you'd like to add something in, we could. If not, it's not mission critical either. We wanted to make sure we brought that to the board. Let me move on to make sure I'm keeping track. I think our next changes were, well, here again, we broke out cell phones in the fire department. Good
night, Morgan.
Oh, Another one to look at is, let's jump down to some of the easier changes first. So in highway, we did the same thing here with cell phones, so that's pretty straightforward. Electricity, we reduced based on Jeff's look into this last week to notice that we could probably budget a little bit less since we caught some errors on their billing last year. And also we increased the center line for paint and shoulders to $28,400. And that will allow us to paint fog lines on Heinsberg Road, Huntington Road, Cochrane Road, and East Hill Road. I want to go back up to donations for a moment. So we started to really work on the charitable appropriations part of the budget this year based on feedback from VLCT, and we followed up with our attorney on how should we actually be budgeting for charitable appropriations. Well, a true social service in statute, it has to actually go to the voters. So as we went through the budget, we looked at the true social services, which you're seeing here on the screen. And we followed up with the attorney last week. He agreed that with the way we sorted things, that made sense to him. So these we're working on a ballot item, and we're getting more advice from the attorney. Will this be a voice vote, or will it be Australian ballot? How do we have to word this? Do they each have to have their own ballot item? Can it be one? That's to be determined. But what we know right now is we want to take them out of this budget to comply with statute. There are other things that used to be in here that weren't really charitable appropriations, like Richmond Rescue and UVM Home Health and Hospice. So Richmond Rescue, those are more health services rather than social services. There's others like Koozies, more policing, and not really a nonprofit. So those have gotten sorted to other spots in the budget. As Jay mentioned, in the revenue side, right now we're looking at $433,366 to offset general unassigned funds. We have a walk through this. We have a look at where we think we're going to get to with unassigned funds. So I'll just review this quickly because not everybody's been in every budget meeting, but the audited balance at the end of FY23, this is the restricted money that goes for highway only, is $708,000 in restricted funds that come out of highway. In the budget for FY24, we know we've budgeted $500,000 to offset the tax base, so we have to account for that. We've received $159,000 from FEMA for the culvert on Thompson Road from the Halloween storm. We have also received $4,474 from the Category Z or management costs that we incurred during the Halloween storm. Then we have so far to date have spent $468,000 on the July flood that happened in July. And yet to be reimbursed. And then I looked at things, so everything in white there is fairly conservative, things that have really already happened. We will be receiving $42,000 from the state. That's their portion from the Halloween flooding. So after FEMA pays, the state pays out. I think we have a reasonable expectation of receiving that within the next 6 months before the end of the fiscal year. So that means that our net change to restricted funds will be $761,000 negative, mostly based on the use of that to offset tax rates and the flood from July, which would leave us with $52,000 in the red. This year is 15% of the highway budget for FY25. So ideally, we would have, or per our policy that the board looked at a couple of weeks ago, we would have $294,000 in restricted funds going into FY25, and we could spend things or put money above that to offset the tax rate. Here, we actually have a deficit. Then we looked at unassigned funds, which is the money left over at the end of the year that's unassigned and anything besides highway.
Right.
The audited number on this for the end of FY23 is $922,000. Again, I looked at a few things that we can, I think, reasonably expect to happen this coming fiscal year. So as we look at projected interest over budget, we had $14,000 projected in interest. We received about $75,000 year to date in the first half already of the fiscal year, due in large part to higher interest rates and the use of certificates of deposit. So projecting that out, we think we'll be at about $150 to end. So we'll be about $136,000 over what we budgeted, and that money will ultimately fall to unassigned funds. And looking at police vacancy savings, we're about $150,000 mid-December year to date on budget. So if you look at what we've spent in the first 5.5 months of the fiscal year versus what if you took the budget and broke it down to 5.5 months, we're about $150,000 under budget in police. So that actually allows us to add $286,000 to this 922, gets us to about 1.2 million. 15% of the general fund budget is 427. So that would leave about $780,000 in unassigned funds to spend. But then what we did was also look at this as a combined total. So we have a total budget, 15% of the total budget, highway and general fund is 722. Our total combined unassigned and restricted is about 1.1 million. And that's how we then arrive at the $433,000, because that will get us to a reserve amount of about $722,000 as we go into FY, not reserve, sorry, an unassigned and restricted fund balance total of 722. So when we get that, we plug that into here, and that is where we now get to our tax rate of about 5.06 increase over the previous year based on the same grand list. And the grand list will most likely change between now and when we set the tax rate. So that rate could go down a little bit, but that's, I probably spoke too much. I probably lost some people, but that's hopefully a good explanation of what we've looked at and how we got to where we are.
Those of us on the select board who've been staring at these numbers for months, I think you did do a good explanation, but one of the questions I always get is, and I'm phrasing it differently because I just like this phrase lately, is where are the gold toilet seats in this budget? And if you look through the budget and you actually look at the line by line increase or decrease over the same line item in the prior year, you're going to see comparatively few discretionary increases. We could make some changes in terms of decreasing the percentage of the health care that our employees get, but that would have two negative effects. Two negative effects and one neutral effect. One, it wouldn't actually raise all that much money. And two, it would set us out from most other towns, which contribute 100%. And three, it would really annoy our employees because it would be seen as trying to balance the budget on their backs. That's not to say it shouldn't be considered, and we did. But the biggest reason I think why we are looking at a potential 5% increase is because of the July flood. If you looked at the math that Josh had up, we budgeted $500,000 to be used for reducing taxes. And then darn if we didn't turn around and have $486,266 worth of unexpected funds, which meant that the usual spillover into the following fiscal year is gone. And it's been being said ever since I've been on the select board that it's a luxury to say, look, we have all these vacancy savings and we can use it to reduce taxes. But we all know that that's unsustainable. You can't count on every year having lots of vacancy savings. If we do have a fully staffed police department, that's going to really change budgeting in the future because we won't have that money. But are there gold toilet seats? Are we being spendthrift? I don't see that we are. One example of an increase that I don't see as a luxury is fog stripes. That's going to cost, it's a safety issue. And it's a safety issue that touches a lot of people in this town. So is every penny in here actually critical? None of us can say because none of us is all wise and all seeing, but I think we've done a pretty good job on this. David, Jeff, Lisa, Bard, do you have any comments?
Josh, how much did we spend to clean the bathrooms and the concession stand and everything at Volunteer Screen?
It was 11,000, wasn't it?
Did that, I'm trying to remember, did that include
For Smart Pro,
Did
right?
that include Town Center?
No,
That was just them, yeah, so about 11,000, I guess.
Okay. So that's underwater right now.
Yeah,
So that's got to be spent again.
mostly.
We've had town staff come in overtime today to keep the roads open. Pete's had to rent heavy equipment to deal with the sudden damages just today. He's had to rent a lot of equipment. So that money that we spent in the July storm, that wasn't a one-time expense. Not even 6 months later, here we are today.
Right.
So we need the liquidity to be able to put that money out because yes, some of it may be reimbursed, but we don't know that. But we still need to lay the money out when it
Yeah.
happens.
And let me just, I'll kind of expand on that and answer Angela's question in the chat. So Angela in the chat asked how much of the 468,000 spent on July flooding is going to be reimbursed. So that 468 is for materials and contracted labor. So that's contracted material. It does not include town labor. So FEMA will reimburse 75% of that. And then we get an extra 17.5% from the state, which is what we talked about a little bit earlier. So essentially we'll get 92.5% of that back. Plus we will get coverage of town labor, and Pete's guys spent about 3.5 months doing largely nothing else besides responding to flood and repairing this.
And that labor is not in the.
So that's not in this. So that's going to be over and above this. So I don't.
It's overtime labor, isn't it?
Nope, it's all labor, straight labor as well. So that number is going to be there. We did not factor that in to the FY25 budget because we don't know when that's going to be reimbursed. We've just begun the process with FEMA of reviewing each and every damage site. It's pretty involved, and we asked, like, how quickly can we get this reimbursed? They described the process. So we go back and forth with our rep. She becomes happy with it. She moves it up the chain at FEMA. It might take them a couple months to review, come back with other questions. They figure out, are they happy with it? Then it goes to the state. They might have further questions and there's more review there. There's a backlog at each one of these spots as well. So it's not like the minute you get it to them, they're right on it. It takes some time. So we didn't feel, because it could take more than 6 months, more than 8 months to get this money back, no matter how fast we try to move internally. So hopefully that answers the question. Then as far as what we did today, we'll see, but it's not likely to be a FEMA claim. If I had to guess right now, it could be, but there's certain thresholds that I think the county has to reach as far as damage. Now, maybe, yeah, and we'll see. I mean, this storm, I think, was a little bit by surprise for a lot of us. So maybe when all the damage is sorted out, we'll reach it. But I'm sort of the assumption right now that any labor and materials that Pete is spending on this are going to not be reimbursed.
Okay.
So what's the next one? Okay. So in essence, so the question is, does that mean FEMA will be paying 3 months of town highway budget for FY24? They will be paying for any wages that were used in that 3 months towards the road. So if they spend a 10-hour day repairing a road, that money will be reimbursable by FEMA. If they spent 5 hours doing routine gravel work that we'd be doing anyway, then that money, that is not going to be reimbursed. But yes, anything that they put towards repairing of roads or volunteers green or town-owned infrastructure will get reimbursed. Again, it'll be at the 92.5% when you add up FEMA and the state. We don't know the timeline. Connie went only to FEMA related work, which I think I just expanded on. And Ian asks, you get about 2K in revenue for every new single family home. Do you know how many permits? So that's something we've asked our lister every year. She usually has a bit of a projection for us by this time. We don't have that projection at this time. Connie, you might have more information from Lisa, but I don't think that she had a projection right now.
Tyler had a number. Is Tyler still with us?
He probably wouldn't know this number. I don't know. But usually, usually Lisa is really good at looking at this and saying, okay, here's the permits. Here's what I think you're going to be. But we don't have that from her yet. But that's something we will have when we get to set the tax rate. We'll know that for sure.
And if we knew, I keep referencing a crystal ball. If we knew exactly when FEMA would reimburse us for these things, if we knew on Tuesday, March 5th, the check's coming, that would make it very easy to budget. Yep. We don't know that. We just saw that the 2019 culvert destruction, we just got that check. Now,
2020,
right. Yeah. Now, my understanding is that there's reason to believe that the money will be turned around a little faster this time.
I'm hopeful. I mean, the culvert was a mitigation project and that took longer. So a lot of the work that Pete did for the most recent flooding was, it happened quickly, he did it fast, and now we're into the reimbursement phase. With the Thompson Road culvert, because it was mitigation, what mitigation means is you're replacing it with a larger piece of infrastructure to help mitigate the problem down the road. So that took more time. There was a hydrology study, there was engineering for this that had to be done. We had to go back out to bid for the construction and schedule the construction. So just getting to that, I think it wasn't until last summer that we, no, not 24, but 22, sorry, I'm losing track of my calendar. In summer 22 was when we finally constructed that project, which was 2.5 years after the flood. So that's part of the reason why that money got delayed, whereas we were actually getting paid back earlier than that on the straight 1-for-1 damage replacements. But again, like Jay said, like I was hoping I was going to talk to FEMA last week and they'd say, oh, reasonably, you'll have half this money by the middle of March. I did not get that answer. I got the answer I gave earlier, which was it's a long process and we're not going to guarantee you a time frame on this right now.
Yeah, and they had a few other projects that they're dealing with.
1 or 2.
They're very busy. Yes.
You know, one of the things that I would point out is that wasn't Pete's first rodeo. And it's you know, what you have told me, Josh, is that Pete is really good at documenting his staff time that might be reimbursable by FEMA. And you know, I think we're really fortunate to have that, because I'm sure there are other towns that have don't have that kind of experience on the team.
Right, and they're left holding the bag when.
And that makes it makes our side of the process that much faster. Because Pete literally came into my office with like, I don't know, 30 folders. Here's every single project. And now we got to go through that, and there's some time to organize that and put it together. But if he wasn't that organized, we'd be spending, and he spent hours doing this, like basically a full week just doing the admin, cutting it all together after every day. He's like, we were on this road and this road. So yes, I thank Pete very much for his forethought on this.
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, just looking at the optics of, trying to present this budget to the public. I know the numbers are going to change a little bit. Right now, without anything changing, 4.8 something million. If we took $3,300 out of it, we'd be under a 5% increase. And to me, that's a big deal. People understand less than 5%. People, $3,000, that doesn't really ring any bells. But if we can keep that percentage increase under 5% going into the vote, I think it will help.
Got a suggestion on how to do that. Is that going to be appropriate? Is it going to be appropriate for us to talk about,
Well, I'd like to actually ask Connie for her contribution because her hand went up like a flash. Connie.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. Right now, we're seeing that 5.06 that does not include if the Conservation Commission gets approved and for how much, and that does not include the donations, which we have now pulled out of the budget because they'll be voted on. Those things will be added. So the 5.06, if both those things are approved, will be higher.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the comment still stands. I originally was looking at more like, 16, 17,000, I thought, but the numbers are still floating, so they're hard to grab. But I think advertising wise, a nice round number smaller than 5 is going to help us more than we think. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going. Go ahead.
So is it appropriate to bring up line items?
Well, actually, I was going to say we could add $4,000 to what we use in unassigned funds, since it's an estimate anyway. If we really wanted to get to 4.99, like that might be a better way to do it than try to pull out of the budget. But just a suggestion.
Okay. So one line item, and of course my computer crashed.
Where would you like to go?
I had the whole spreadsheet, but if you look under the police budget, under overtime.
Yeah, we could probably reduce that. No, it's up here, right?
It's up. Yeah, it's up. Yeah, you're back up.
What's that?
This will take it out.
Back up. Right. Yeah. Overtime.
Overtime. So we have $20,000 in overtime, and we have almost $350,000 in salaries, which we will not likely use all of that. Overtime to me, one of the reasons that we've used overtime money in the past is because we've been understaffed, right? And our one 1.5 police officers that we've had have booked a lot of overtime. I think if we're both more fully staffed and have the option of using contracting, it's the same difference really, whether we contract with officer as far as our bottom line is, whether we contract more or less, if we contract with Heinsberg officers. I don't think we need the $20,000 worth of overtime. I think I could see it in the future if it was useful to keep track of overtime, but we're a long ways away from that at the moment. And we're certainly not next year.
Reasonable.
That's a good point.
Connie,
Except for the fact we're talking about a union contract. So I don't think we can contract out to another town if we have a staff that can work overtime.
No,
Same money.
well, but I think the point is like, we're only really within the bounds of the union agreement allowed to outsource right now for police services because we are so short-staffed. But the agreement with the union is we're working on hiring people. But I think we could probably go, even if we were fully staffed.
Yeah.
And I think we could go a little lower on overtime and not with the assumption that we're gonna contract it out though, because I think at that point we would be running afoul of our agreement with the union. But I think we could probably go less if there's one spot to cut.
Well, in 2023, we spent 11.
Well, yeah, so I think we could probably reasonably do that and not suffer a great consequence if we wanted to. So, I mean, I could put in like 15,000 there, which would cut out, hopefully my formulas are working tonight. Hey, all right,
499.
4.93 is what we get with,
well,
if that's a goal, but that's where.
but in all seriousness, we have a tendency because we are used to doing this. We're used to pushing the dollars around on the table with rulers and stuff to almost act like this is monopoly money. And I know that none of us think that way. Absolutely none of us think about, this isn't real money. But to somebody who's living on a fixed income in a mobile home, this is real money. And I catch myself periodically, making light of it, but I really shouldn't. And I apologize for the times I've done it. This is, at the end of the day, every percent on the tax rate is something that's going to make a deep hit to somebody's wallet. So I just think we need to remember that. And, we can think flippant thoughts, but I think we should avoid saying them. That's just my 2 cents.
Can I speak to that, Jay?
Sure.
So I ran for the legislature back in the 1990s. And at that time, the thing that everybody said when I knocked on their door is that, property taxes are killing me. You need to make it based on income. It shouldn't be based on property because, a lot of people have owned their house for a long time and then, they go on Social Security and that it doesn't reflect what their life is like. Since that time, the legislature fixed it. It had some bumps along the road. It's Act 60 and Act 67, I think it was, in various different ways. But our income tax, our property tax now is income sensitive. 2/3 of the people in the state receive some kind of adjustment on their property tax because of income sensitivity. And there was talk earlier this month, I think, about what was going to happen to school tax rates, because of increase in the education tax. And they were going to have to adjust that sum. This year was 2.3% of your income. And next year, they're projecting it'll be 2.6% of your income. But it's still a percentage of your income, and that's real dollars. My personal experiences when my wife retired from teaching, our income went down substantially, and so did our property tax. Substantially, like over $2,000. And that's because the property tax is adjusted for income sensitivity. So the people who live in mobile homes who are on a fixed income, if they're not taking advantage of the homestead exemption, we should help them do that because there is relief. And that's not to mean that we have a blank check.
Mhm.
But the argument that the little old lady in the village who's lived in her house for 50 years and is on a fixed income and can't afford her property tax, she should not pay more than 2.6% of her income on property tax. So
No, you're
I didn't want to make this as a point that's relative to us necessarily, but I think it's something that doesn't get said enough. And I don't think enough people understand that that's available to them.
No, and we should make a note and do this every year to publish stuff like this to Front Shores Forum, because that's the one thing that I believe almost everybody in town looks at. And it's proved to be a very effective way of communicating things, like my little update recently on fog striping. We've said that in meetings, but people didn't listen because they're not watching these meetings, but they read Front Shores Forum. And so things like encouraging people to look into auxiliary dwelling units on their property, or what you've just been talking about. We have a job to make our public aware of these things. That's also something that the Howard Center community, what's the term? Not first call, but the other one, the contact. Community outreach. That is actually something that's part of their job. Periodically, I post information about that to say, if you don't know how to get the most out of the programs available to you, here's some people to call because that's what they do. And so that's another thing that periodically we just should get out there. My comment was not so much, I mean, yes, we all use the example of the little old lady who only drove the car to church, hyperbole like that. But to everybody, somebody who owns their house and has a comfortable income still doesn't need to have us joking about this being, oh, what the hell, let's just do this. And I understand where Lisa's coming from, but I feel a little anxious about us saying, let's game the system by just doing this just to get it below 4.99. I personally don't feel comfortable saying, it's all about optics. It's not about proving that we've done the work. That's just, I don't
believe that we've done that. And I don't believe, it wasn't my intent to do this because of optics, of the overtime budget. My intent was.
No, that I feel is absolutely valid. It's just, we do get a little silly sometimes, especially when it's 9:46 at night.
Yes. So I have one more suggestion, and it actually isn't a money thing. It's more of a semantic thing. The Williston Community Justice Center is now under the police department, and I had suggested last time that we put it under, what is it, contracted social services? Is that what
I thought it was town administration.
Contracted social services. So right now we have the special transportation, and we have the Howard Center Community Outreach under a new section called Contracted Social Services. I think that it lives well there, and let me explain why. We haven't always had a police department that has fully utilized the services of Williston Community Justice Center, even when it was available to them. I would prefer that they not be under their budget, because it's uncomfortable to go to your superior and have a difference of opinion. So I know we talked about, they could go to Josh, but if it's under, if it's under the police budget, and I'm not, I don't think this is a problem with our current setup. My understanding is Heinsberg uses Williston Community Justice more than any other town in the county. And I applaud them for it, and I think that they'll do that for us as well. However, leadership at the Heinsberg Police Department can change. And we've had many different police chiefs over the past 5 years. And they might not all think the same way relative to Williston Community Justice. So my preference would be to put it under the contracted social services, take it out of the police budget. It does not change the bottom line. So it's not a money thing, it's more of a semantic thing, and it's more of a kind of a policy thing. Take that.
I have no objection to doing that. I agree with your reasoning. Okay, I'm going to call on the following people in this order. Lisa, because she's on the select board, then Kara, then Ian. Lisa?
Yep, thanks. Back to what I said about 5%, I'm not trying to game the system. I mean, we're talking about a relatively small amount of money out of a much larger sum. So, but $1 is $1. And I think anybody that's scraping by really values $1, maybe more so than we do. And I know that when people listen to advertising, when they go shopping, they look at percentages. Wow, this 5% discount, if you buy today, it's everywhere. People use arithmetic to get a sense of whether they're paying too much for something. And a budget that's less than 5% higher than last year means that's a difference. That's a number that people can digest. They know what it means. They may not, look at the 4-point-something million dollars. Well, they will, but under 5% shows some great restraint on our part. It's something I'll brag about, and I think you all will. And, the higher that number is, the less I'm going to talk about it because it hurts. So I think we should help ourselves with that. I want to see the vote in March go well for us. And I think that's maybe a small part of it, but I think it'll help.
Thank you, Lisa. Kara?
First of all, Jay, I want to thank you for taking this very serious. And yes, I understand Jeff's comment about people having help from the state paying their property taxes. But this 5% increase, when you have increased taxes every single year while building unassigned funds to the level that they have been built to, at the last meeting where Josh presented the graphs, that at the end of FY23, you were at, and the calculation was 55% at 2.5 million, whether those numbers previously presented were in error. He had a graph, a chart, and you were at 35% at last year's town meeting, or 33%, I'm sorry. So the fact that you are continually raising taxes and continuously building this fund is my point to you, that we do not need to have a 5% tax increase. People have other strains on their finances and not just property taxes, like medical expenses. Other people are going through things in this community that it's not just about those who can afford to pay anything you put in front of them. And there's never been a budget yet that I'm aware of that the voters have voted down. So they are 100% putting your trust in you. So my point is, if you truly care about the community, you're going to try to help those in the community a little bit more and not just talk about affordable housing, because there's people in that in-between point that this impacts. So here's my question. Can you tell me which year you had 4 full-time police officers for a full year? When was the last year
2018,
that you had 4 full-time police officers for a full year? It's a legitimate question, because if data drives your decisions, then that data should help drive that decision for your police budget next year.
Jeff, I think I heard you say 2018. It might have been 2018. I think when I got here in 2018, we were pretty fully staffed. Our goal, of course, going into 25 is to be fully staffed again. We have had some movement most recently with Chief Cambridge. We've got one candidate we're pretty close with.
And one candidate we're interviewing on Thursday.
One we're interviewing Thursday, and a couple others that I know we're aware of. And I hesitate to budget for less than 4, with our goal being to get to 4. If we don't have the money to get to 4, well, then we're really handcuffed to not go up that to fully funded at 4.
And you still have your hand up, Kara, but I'd like to respond to one other thing you said. 2 years ago, we lowered taxes. I repeat, 2 years ago, we lowered taxes. We lowered taxes, we lowered taxes, we freaking lowered taxes.
You lowered it because of your the unassigned funds that you had. So I say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Jay, because I finally got listened to 2 years ago. So thank you. So my question is, can we consider using a little bit more of the unassigned funds? I know you're going to get some FEMA reimbursements at 92 point whatever % you've got going, but could you do that?
So I also want to address, so the meeting where we showed that we were going to be at 55%. So that was pre-audited numbers. And then we made that clear in that meeting that these were before we got the FY23 audit. Since then, we got the audit and that has come down a bit. So let me share the screen I redid the graph, and unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you. I was not aware.
No, I know. So this is, and I apologize, these numbers, I don't know why they reformatted. This is the second, anyway. FY24, we are looking at, it went down to 35%. And then as we look at, I did some numbers more today here to say, well, if we use the full 433, like we talked about in 25, then that's going to get us down to a projection of 15% at the end of 25, we'd be at 15% of the previous year's budget, assuming everything comes in even on budget, which we know it's not gonna. There's going to be vacancy savings. There's going to be FEMA reimbursements, hopefully. But with the information that we have now, that's the goal.
Thank you. I really appreciate that clarification. I do know at your select board, at your town meeting back in March, when you were presenting, I think you presented the 32.37%. That discussion was that you were trying to reduce that. And so far from that 32.37, you've only increased it.
Well,
so in 25, you're projecting that you're going to decrease it, is what you're saying.
Well, that's that, and every year we project to try to decrease it. So yes, so right now what I'm looking at is if we use budget this 433, we would be down to 23.99 as we sort of head into 25, and as we at the end of 25 we'd be at 15%. And this is the 25 budget. We don't know what the 26 budget is. But we would be at 15% of the previous year's budget.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. I really appreciate that, Josh. I appreciate the clarification on the police officers, but we will know we will know before you set the tax rate if we are really going to have 4 full-time police officers for the year. So like you said, in the very beginning, Jay, you were researching if we can potentially buy down the tax rate if we know for sure we're not going to have a full year of a full police department. Is that correct? If you're looking into that?
That's related to this particular year. I tend to be very pessimistic about certain things. Hiring police officers is one of them. But for the first time in quite a long time, I'm feeling actually pretty optimistic. The candidate that we interviewed who's going through his background check and should be finished with it any day now, I think will be a real credit to the department. And we have a candidate that we're going to be interviewing on Thursday who would be coming in at the corporal rank with 10 or so years experience.
Beautiful.
And we've got another corporal candidate. We have another candidate for corporal, similar experience that we haven't yet scheduled an interview for. And Anthony has a 4th candidate that is a little more further out. The reason that I'm optimistic is because at the end of the day, we talk about incentives to hire police, to get police to come work for you. You know, is it going to be the pay? Is it going to be you take your car home? Is it going to be the health insurance? Is it going to be because we give you a sign-on bonus? I will tell you what makes the biggest difference, and it's having a chief that you trust and are willing to work for. And that's something that we've got, somebody who they can trust and who is an experienced officer, and who knows how to beat the bushes, and that's what we've got in Chief Cambridge.
Jay, can I just say, Jay, I push you guys a lot. I appreciate you giving the update on the police department. I appreciate you giving the update on these funds with a new number that hasn't been presented to the public before. I just like it. I just want to have you keep sharpening your pencils, and you guys have been listening for the last 2 years. I do appreciate that. And I am trying to help out those who are having difficulties right now. And I just want to speak for them as well. So I thank you for listening. I won't make you harp on this anymore. I appreciate the information that you're providing, and I will watch for where the financials are at the end of the third quarter for FY24. So, rolling into 25, what it's looking like. And I'd love to see what the audit adjustments were. If I could please get a copy of that, Josh, what the audit adjustments were for the end of the year that drove you from 55% projection to a 35%. That's a pretty drastic swing.
Well, so just on that, so we were estimating that number prior to receiving the audit. And when we received the audit, we looked at it and said, wow, this looks a lot different than what our projections were. As we reviewed our projections and the audit closely, we realized that we did not properly take into account use of unassigned and restricted funds in FY23. And so we were actually overestimating how much we had on hand. And then we looked at the audit, it became clear that the way they were calculating was 100% correct. And that's so like the audit didn't get adjusted. The audit adjusted where we were projecting.
Yeah. No, I'd still like to see if there was audit adjustments and
I'll send you the audit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I can get you the draft audit. It's just in draft format right now, but it's getting pretty close.
No, when it's done. Thank you. When it's done.
Yeah, well, then that should be shortly.
I would
Thank you.
point out that the Heinsberg Police Department is
fully
the
staffed.
only police department that I know of that's fully staffed. And has been for the last couple of years. And he's had extra candidates, which is part of the motivation for picking up Richmond.
Right.
So I think there's reason to be hopeful.
I agree. And Carol, I will say this, I appreciate you and Ian and the other people who join our calls for holding us accountable, because if we do not have people holding us accountable, it gets very easy to shift into the, oh, it's all monopoly money. And we know it's not. And I appreciate the work that Jeff has put into going line by line through things and catching. Remember, this is a guy who caught the discrepancy with what we were being charged for light poles and how many we actually had. The select board does put a lot of work into this, but that's not to say we have all the answers. At the end of the day, we hope through community input to get the best possible budget for our town. Okay. Let us move on.
Well, I guess question.
We need a motion.
Well, it'd be great to get a motion, but do we want to make any adjustments about reducing overtime? Do we want to add in $1,500 for police public relations? I think those are the only
Okay,
two
that's a good
open
point.
questions right now. What are we
And to
gonna do?
move the item for Jeff's, to move community outreach, excuse me, to you.
Yeah, and I can, if you guys are, like last week, it sort of sounded like, I can kind of stay, I can kind of move, so we left it where it was. But if the consensus is we can move it, it doesn't matter to me. We'll move it.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any objection.
We'll move
I'll-
that. I just want to know where we want to go on those two police budget lines.
Okay, I think we should, this is only the chair, this is not a motion, I don't make motions. I think the public relations money would be appropriate, and I also would support lowering the overtime. So if somebody wants to make a motion to that effect,
Or do you want to see how it looks, put it in and see what it does?
Sure.
if you want to put in the $1,200.
Was 15, was 15 where you wanted to go with overtime, or did you have a different number? I kind of pulled that out of thin air, I think.
I think 10 would be enough myself, but,
Okay.
and, can we change public relations to like community relations?
Hi, could you bring me the chart?
Like advertising and
Yeah, that's
more
what you're
like,
saying. Yeah, community, yeah, that makes sense. Let me just,
I can't come.
What it's worth, we pay for that stuff for the fire department.
right, it's the same kind of thing, and
yep, so that's 10,000. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, though. Let's just change this to community relations.
the 1,500 sounds like plenty.
Yeah, I think that was a number that Chief Chamber.
But that's only if the police department catches the Grinch.
Well,
If
yeah.
they don't catch the Grinch, then I want
Yeah.
it.
Connie.
So that gets us to 4.83, and Connie's.
Yeah, when Connie has her hand up, I work.
Yeah.
But Connie,
On the police overtime, I can honestly say when we had a full staff, so whether full or whether short staffed, we were always above 15,000. And wages are a lot more now than they were back when we had a full staff. So just a thought, I think 10 is too low. I think 15 is a good place to be.
I'm fine with 15.
okay, Jeff says he's fine with 15.
Put a 15.
David, do you have
15's
And
fine.
then I think Anthony wanted 1,200 on the public relations.
1,200. Sorry, I thought I
Okay.
remembered 15, but I admittedly did not write it down. So, if we do that, then we're at 4.96.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's, 15 and 12, 4.96. So
Okay,
if you like it, you can make a motion to put it to the voters.
okay, so we have a motion, but the overall budget of the voters. We need a motion.
I'd say, so I move that we move the budget that has been presented to us with modifications for town meeting day. How's that? Does that work?
Yeah, noticing I didn't give you a draft motion. That looks great.
This is the, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Jeff Ford.
I'll
seconded
second.
by Sander,
Oh, sorry.
and by Lisa Miller.
We'll fight over it.
You thirded it, to approve the draft budget and put it to the voters on town meeting day. Is that more or less what we said? Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
And Bard, oh, Bard is still with us. We got a note word that he may be fading, and J.I.
Yeah.
So thank you, Connie. Thank you, Jeff, David, Lisa, Bard, Josh especially, the department heads for doing such a good job pulling together their budget requests and for keeping the kind of records that get us reimbursed, and to our interested members of our town who pay attention to this stuff. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Transparency is important, and we can't do that when we don't welcome questions. So I want to thank everybody for all the questions that they brought forward. And hopefully this budget will work. Okay, our next item is Salamanders. Judy, are you here? Judy's here.
I am here. How are you?
I'm living the dream. How are you?
Likewise. I know you love this project.
I do.
Great.
So we have a request from the Conservation Commission to amend the request to utilize $150 from the Conservation Fund for work related to the Save Our Salamanders network. And specifically, we are proposing going from 150 to 200. The draft motion in the packet is to approve the use of up to $200 from the Conservation Reserve Fund to cover the cost of safety vests, clickers, and 3 metal signs and posts, as described in the Richmond Save Our Salamanders Network proposal dated October 10th, 2023, and amended on December 1st, 2023 to account for the additional sign and post on West White Hill. So, Judy, would you like to expand on that at all?
Sounds great.
Yes, this is the same proposal you saw earlier, but somehow I had failed to include the third post. So we're just simply making sure that we've done this right and have you approve that slight change in the budget.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
I move to approve the use of up to $200 from the Conservation Reserve Fund to cover the cost of safety vests, clickers, and 3 metal signs and posts as described in the Richmond Save Our Salamanders Network proposal dated October 10th, 2023, and amended on December 1st, 2023 to account for the additional sign and post on West White Hill. I think that's good. I don't think I need to say this motion replaces the motion made on October 16th, 2020.
I just put that in there to cover that it's not an additional 200. It replaces the 150.
I
To
believe-
make it clear.
I believe David tried to yawn a second.
Yeah, this is David. I'll second.
With motion and second to approve the request from the Conservation Committee to increase their request from 150 to 200 to be able to pay for the additional signpost.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
This is David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And J.I. Okay, the next item on the agenda is also
Thank
in
you.
relation to the Conservation Commission. This is the discussion of the Conservation Reserve Fund ballot item. Josh, could you introduce this?
So traditionally, the Conservation Reserve Fund has been voted on every year by Australian ballot to add 1 cent to the tax rate to fund the Conservation Fund. In the last 4 or 5 years, that's meant about $45,000 if it passes. This year, the grand list went up due to the reappraisal, so it's closer to $75,000 for FY25. So the question going into, for FY24, so the question going into the FY25 budget and ballot item is it appropriate to keep it at 1 cent, or do we change that to a flat funding fee of X number of dollars? So the Conservation Commission is here to provide some of their feedback on that, since they help to manage the fund. I'll turn it over to Judy, and I'm not sure, hopefully your associates are also here still, but it is getting late.
Well, members of the Richmond Land Trust are here.
Right.
And I had a presentation. Do you mind putting that on the record player there?
I can certainly put that vinyl on and put the needle down.
There you go.
Yeah, here we are. Jay, what's the way, how do I share this without having?
Put it in, hit F5.
In F5? I have an F5?
If you don't, just here.
Yeah, just try. You're faster at this than I am.
Just make it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't want me to let me drag. I'm trying to get to the menu.
Yeah, I think you gotta move.
And move this.
Yeah, move that out of the way.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Zero to show it as. There you go. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, menu of the way.
I would have gotten there too, but it would have taken me twice as long. Okay, Judy, I think we are good to go.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this quickly. So I'm Judy Rosovsky. I'm chair of the Conservation Commission. And one of our primary goals is to make recommendations to the select board for how to use a conservation reserve fund based on applications we receive from the public or nonprofits or whomever. This action-packed slide just points out the geographic location of our multiple and diverse projects. This fund was started in 2005, and we've had a very successful 19-year program to meet the Conservation Reserve Fund primary goals of funding conservation, recreation, historical preservation, and working lands. And by having this fund, we are able to do a number of things, which includes being able to put money towards a project in an almost immediate timeline and leverage money from other grant sources. So it is also has a lot of really good public engagement because we have the people who vote on it as a large number of people in the town, and it's their money. So that's great. And the other thing is, next slide, please. Thank you. It's a really good return on investment for what the taxpayers put into it. They get almost 4 times their money back in money we leverage. So for almost $600,000 of town investment, we generated over $2 million. That's pretty great. Next slide, please. So traditionally, as Josh said, we put this on the Australian ballot. And so far, the town has supported this fund by usually a pretty good majority. Next slide. So as Josh mentioned, up until recently, we had gotten between 45 and 48,000 a year, and we have a sudden spike. So this graph is to sort of show way back in 2008 was the last time the grand list was reassessed, and that provides a spike in the Conservation Reserve Fund funding. And then we're level funded for many years. And just now we had another assessment, and that spiked the amount of money we get. But as you can see, by comparing that to the Consumer Price Index, it really only brings us back up to sort of real life spending. So in fact, the fund loses money or value purchasing ability over time. So that's what this graph is designed to illustrate. That we're pretty much level funded except for when the grand list is reassessed, which has its good and bad things. Next slide, please. So I'd like to thank Jeff Forward, who was the one who first brought considering other funding mechanisms to our attention. And some of those alternatives are to maintain the status quo, or change the allocation, or you guys could increase it too, or make the fund come out of the town budget process as a line item, or, you know, make a set amount, put a cap on the amount the fund has, things like that. And so we, as Bard mentioned earlier, we all tried to go in with an open mind because this is something that's really good to think about. But we felt for, you know, reasons of stability, the ability to leverage money, some of the projects we know are coming up, that the current funding mechanism adjusts for that loss in value over time, plus the, you know, large amount of public engagement, that those are all good reasons for us to support staying the course. Next slide, please. Which of course is up to the select board. So some of the needs we're going to have out there are listed here, and I just like to take a moment to say I'm so sorry for all the people who are experiencing flooding damage yet again, including our valiant Trails Committee. So there's going to be trail repair from the July floods, and that includes the Old Jericho Road, which is fairly badly damaged. We'd like to do a river assessment on the Winooski and also try to find ways to build flood resiliency into the town. The Andrews Community Forest will need trail work and other maintenance. The town center is going to be renovated, and we could do historic preservation or greenscaping or flood resiliency. And there's some other projects. Gary Bresser and his really imaginative Emerald Path would be another project we'd like to fund. So there's many, many ways to use this money. Next slide, please. Unbeknownst to me, the Richmond Land Trust had been discussing the same issue, and they came to similar conclusions that the Conservation Commission did, which is to maintain the status quo of keeping this on the town meeting Australian ballot, you know, partly because you get maximal taxpayer direct input into how their money is being used and whether they approve of that or not. And plus the periodic adjustments to keep up with rising costs and those resources that we can accrue to put forward to conservation and related town projects. Next slide, please. So both the Conservation Commission and the Richmond Land Trust have come to the same conclusion. But again, I understand it's a select board's prerogative to decide what to do. And we do appreciate the opportunity to have had some really thoughtful discussions about what funding mechanism would work best. Pretty much came to the conclusion that it's been successful and it provides advantages that far outweigh any disadvantage that this funding mechanism might have. So I hope you consider our thoughts, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
I appreciate the input from the Conservation Commission and the Richmond Land Trust.
Yeah, Judy, I follow your reasoning. I think it makes sense. Kara?
Yeah, Judy, I think your reasoning makes total sense. I think it's honestly, I think it's a slam dunk. By staying the course and the 1 cent, can Josh just run the calculations on, I think if it's $78,000, what a $78,000 hit on a line item would be, just so that you can see what the true percentage tax increase is for everybody, if that's calculated in. Not this minute, but if you don't mind doing that. But my one question is, I think I do recommend staying with what the Vermont Land Trust is saying, and Judy as well. But my one question is if the select board determines that there's a project that they believe the conservation funds should or could be used for, do they have to get approval by the conservation committee to use the conservation funds?
So is the question, the proposal came to the select board, not the Conservation Commission?
Or if there was a project the select board wanted to use it, you came up with your own project. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah, we have precedent for that.
Is that the case, Judy?
Well, there was a riprap incident. I don't know what to call it. I mean, I'll let the select board answer, but in the past, this issue has come up and we've tried to avoid
Well, if you have a
setting
history,
up-
I appreciate understanding it. Are you talking about the riprap along the Winooski River right beside the bridge?
Yep,
There were
Can you
two. There was the one for Volunteers Green and there was a second one by the wellhead, the pump house for the water department.
Okay, and I just want to make sure I understand what the process is. So did the select board have to complete an application and go to the conservation committee and they had to approve it? Or did you just spend the money and then the conservation committee had to approve after? I want to make sure I understand that one process.
I have no idea.
it was a little dance, Kara, that the all bodies involved did to avoid having that situation happen. So
Has anything been done to correct it so that we're clear on what we can or cannot do?
well, it's my impression the select board could certainly use that fund if they wanted to. The town policy is to put in the application, so we just haven't had that come up in that direct manner.
Okay. Thank you. I knew there was some kind of confusion that happened and I was just trying to remember in my head what happened with it. I appreciate that clarification, but I agree with Judy's presentation. I think it's stay the course. I just would like to know what true percentage taxes are going to go up for people if they vote in favor of it, and just to make the public aware through a posting, if that's how they're going to do it. But I agree with you, Judy. I think that stay the course, it's easily explained. It's what's always been done since 2005. And I think you got the taxpayer support.
So, I for one would, if there was a project, I would ask for the Conservation Commission's advice. But, do we need to make a motion for this?
I mean, if you want to, you can. You'll
You can.
ultimately approve the entire town meeting warning. And it'll be
We
on
can do it
that.
at that time.
You could do it at that time. Yeah, I mean, I can put it, or if you want to make a motion, I can.
We can just knock it off now if you
Yeah, why
want.
don't we knock it off now? So
And then it'll be on the warning again. And I do, if you want to explore the
I
number,
move
Carol
to
was
put on
asking.
the town meeting warning, an article that asks the voters for a 1 cent property tax assessment to go towards the Conservation Reserve Fund. Does that sound right?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion from Jeff Ford, seconded by David Sanders, to put to the voters I'm sorry, Jeff, say it again.
To put 1 cent on the property tax rate with the funds raised to go towards the Conservation Reserve Fund.
Take that. Lisa Bard, any questions? Nope. Okay, you've heard the motion. Please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye.
If you want me to answer Kara's question?
Oh, please.
Sure. Okay, let me share screen. Sorry, I realize I'm not sharing screen. So looking at the budget, without conservation fund, we are at 4.96% increase. If we add the conservation fund in at 1 cent, that's 78162. Then the increase goes up to 7.09. And I always put this into my budget presentation to try to thoroughly explain that this is not included in the budget being voted on. That's on the separate ballot item. And also this year, I'll add to that presentation the discussion about the charitable appropriations, which will also be voted on separately so that people understand when they vote on those are additions to the budget as presented, just to try to let everybody know.
Okay.
One thing can I ask real quick of that, Josh, is that calculation is based on the current grand list. The 1 cent is going to be on the next year's grant, on the future grand list, right? So the future grand list hasn't been determined yet. So that 78,000 is not the true 7%. It's going to be more than 7%.
Right.
Correct?
And assuming the grand list goes up, and it does, it will be more than that. It'll be based on 1% of the grand list as finalized when we set the tax rate in July. And I think I'm almost sure I make that clarification in the budget presentation to say based on the current grand list, but it'll be set in July.
Okay.
So
Yes.
heads up, it
Good to
could
stay.
be a much bigger percentage.
Well, I'm
Well, I mean, not a
sure
much
how-
bigger, but a substantial if
Yeah.
we've got a lot of new houses, that's all.
Right, yeah, it has a potential to go up a bit, but probably not thousands of dollars, I don't think.
We put on the motion. We have not.
Oh, you haven't voted? I'm sorry.
don't think we have.
I thought you voted.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a vote. Please state your name. The vote is to go with the 1%. To put to the voters. Please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, I.
And Jay, aye. Okay, thank you. And I appreciate everybody's patience. There have been some
Thank
things on the
you.
agenda that took time. We are down to 4 things to go, plus an executive session or 2. Review the draft town meeting warning. If we like it, we can just move it.
Well, it's not. No, it's not ready to be approved yet.
Okay, not ready. You're right.
I wanted you guys to review it.
Bond versus note.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And appropriation still. I just have, I want to hear a question.
I would suggest that we table this for the.
Okay.
tonight. You
That's
know,
fine.
That's fine too.
We're getting kind of late, you know?
Yep.
Right.
That is,
So both this and the next item, the
Review of bond and note options.
well, we need to sort of know that.
you want to decide on that before we,
Yeah, because we need, if
Okay.
we need to get
All right.
paperwork ready for January 2nd, so,
okay,
this
this is more complicated. than
Okay.
that.
sorry.
So for those of you watching at home, we'll let Bart and Lisa, do you have any objection to tabling the town warning discussion?
Not at all.
Okay, and the next item on the agenda is review of bond and note options for borrowing to fund the renovation for the town center and consideration of approving with a bond or a note. Jeff, I'm going to try to summarize quickly and then you can fill in the details. Jeff looked at bonds versus notes. Bonds are structured so more interest is paid up front and total payments amount decrease over the life of the bond. A note has a flatter structure, so you're essentially paying the same way over the life of the note. With a note, you tend to pay a little bit more. Jeff asked the bond bank for payback schedules for a 30-year bond, 30-year note, and 20-year but note. And Jeff, I will now shut up and let you give us the pros and cons.
Well, I actually was looking forward to this discussion because I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. They're just different.
They are.
The way bonds are structured is you pay a fixed principal payment and a declining interest payment over the life of the bond. It starts out with $9.8 million. It starts out at about $750,000 first year and goes down to about $340,000 in year 30. Maybe a little bit less. With a note, it stays more or less level at about this, similar to the first year costs, $725,000, but it's more like your mortgage. In my experience with my mortgage, it killed me the first year I did it and it wasn't so bad, 20 years out, if it was the same amount, and then with a 20-year note, you're able to pay a similar amount over a less period of time and a whole lot less interest. So, it seemed like, the 20-year note, there were some advantages to that.
And a 20-year bond was, you probably said this. Why did we know?
Do a 20-year bond, but it would have the same function. So what would happen is that, you'd be paying $1 million the first year and then it would go down to 500,000.
Right, got it.
Something on that nature.
So you're
I think it'd be pretty expensive.
The interest rates are, those were the interest rates that were given to us by the bond bank?
Those are, sort of point in time interest rates. So the actual interest rate that we get will be the interest rate at the time that we take the bond, which will be months, if not almost a year from now by the time we find.
They could be less,
They could be going down, yes.
The Fed is projecting that there'll be less, the interest rates will be going down. So it's a good point. I don't think, this is the best information we have right now.
Yeah.
It's all going to be relative though, the same dynamic.
Yep.
okay. Connie?
Oh, it's Connie Lander.
Nope, but she always has something to say on this.
Oh, to Ian.
I know.
Still here.
Connie, are you still here? If she's
I
not,
am.
okay,
I am.
you usually comment on this kind of thing. Do you have any thoughts?
I haven't seen the amortization schedules or anything like that. I mean, from a finance perspective, making the best financial decision is spending the least amount of money that you can. But that doesn't necessarily work for individual homeowners. That's going to be a pretty big payment every year, no matter what option we go with.
Okay, Ian?
Hi, sorry.
I had a question about our bond rating. You guys know what that is?
I do not know our bond rating.
So that would be the bond bank's bond rating. I have no idea.
Okay.
I think we will find out, Ian, though, that's important.
Yeah, I'm just looking at like muni bond rates as of today. Like single A 20-year is about 3.9%. That's like I would assume we're at least an A. Because as far as I know, we've never defaulted on a loan. So just saying, like, I think the rates are probably a little lower right now than what you've got listed, and like you said, they're probably going down.
Yeah, we got this information directly from the bond bank. We asked for sample schedules, so I don't know what rate you're looking at, but this is the rate they gave us.
Yeah, this is just from I've got a couple different resources for these rates, and they're kind of in that range. They're about 20 to 30 basis points below, and that, like, I don't know how the bond bank works either. That might be their fee. So all I know is like what you can go out and buy, like as an investor, not so much as a borrower.
Ian, what you could do is you go to the Vermont Bond Bank's website, and they do have a listing of their bond rating under Moody's, I think.
Okay, I'll check
So
it
you
out.
take a look. You know, you might know better than I.
I'll look. Thanks.
Okay, so Jeff, your recommendation again?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was curious how other, what I liked about the 20-year note was that we spent a lot less in interest.
Yeah. And maybe just to kind of look at comparison,
And
we're looking at that.
we have the first payment.
Well, I did a whole payback.
So,
whole
yeah,
thing. So,
so-
on the 30-year bond, it starts at about $95 per $100,000 in home value, and then decreases over the 30 years to about $42. And again, these numbers are projections. It's going to change based on grand list value. But this is like, if you were looking at all things equal right now, then the 20-year note, as we're looking at that, it stays at a fairly consistent $92 per $100,000 in home value over the 20 years.
Right, and that translates through to payments. So I recall now. So it's something like, $750,000 with the 30-year bond in the first year, 589,000,
Right here,
something like that.
So the note would be 725.
And the note would be 725. So that's, but that's only over 20 years rather than, over 30.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like your recommendation is a 20-year note.
I'd like that better. I think, I've been thinking about it for the last few days. I think I like that better myself. But.
Okay, I see several hands up. Connie, you have yours up. Ian seems to still have his up, and apparently one other person does.
Okay.
Okay, let's go. Connie, Ian.
I mean,
Sorry.
no, I'll scan this. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was not expanded.
Go ahead.
So Jeff, on these, in all three scenarios, are you getting all the money up front?
Yes, I believe so. So this is based on borrowing $9.8 million in 2024, I think, something like that. And then using it for construction financing, putting it in the bank, I'm not sure that's what we would want to do. What we might want to do, and I think Ian brought up a good point, that it might be better to wait, even into 2025. We won't spend all of it at day one of this project. We'll spend it over time. So we could use, some of our cash flow. We could do construction financing, over time before we get to that point. My understanding is what's going to be on the warning is authorization to borrow up to $9.8 million.
Up to.
And now my hope is that we actually don't have to borrow that much money. My hope, there's some indication that the construction prices might be coming down some. That would be great.
Right now, they're gonna be about as high as they're gonna get.
You would think so, and we might not, the earliest we would go out to bid would be, mid-late 2024. So things might be different at that time. That would be good. The committee has looked into several different potential grant sources. That could be good. We could do, FEMA flood mitigation money potentially, energy efficiency money, that kind of stuff. And that could bring it down $1 million or $2 million, conceivably. We could, one thought that the committee had is that we could use some of the revenue from our rent to be paying for bond payments. Right? So like, we take in about $120,000 a year in rent for the building. We could use, half of that because, and leave the other half for the town center reserve fund for repairs, because repairs will be less. With the new building, conceivably, the repairs will be less. So that's another thing. We don't have to make those decisions tonight. But that's something that the town center committee was discussing and thought it was a select board decision, in the future sometime.
And I'm looking at Jeff like a fish gulping. I thought some of our lease agreements were for like $1 a year or something. Where are we getting the 120?
We get like 100,000 from the post office and like 15 or 20 from the.
I was forgetting the post office.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Connie, go ahead.
So, I mean, certainly all those questions don't have to be answered now, but where I was going with that, as we were talking about cash flow, unassigned funds, restricted funds, what is going to be available, what's not going to be available. When the ARPA money gets used, that cash flow is going to go way down. So what we do need to keep in mind is anything, whether it be the town center renovation or anything, our cash flow is going to be impacted by any situation where we are having to pay out and then seek reimbursement. That could be, that's why I'm asking, how do these work? Because we're going to be waiting on FEMA money to come from us. If we do the FEMA mitigation plan, we're going to have to lay that money out and wait to be reimbursed. When we do Bridge Street, that 80% grant payment, we're going to have to lay the money out and wait to be reimbursed. All those things are going to impact our cash flow. So I think if this gets approved to go through, then we really need to get into the nitty-gritty at that point and say, what are we doing? When is it going to happen, and how much money, what parts of the project and when are they going to happen that will have the greatest amount of cash flow? So if we're not going to get the loan all up front, we have to be really, really, really careful about other mechanisms we use. Now, we have done with the water department, both the water tank and East Main Street, we did bans on them. So for the first year, we got a ban through another bank that carried us until the point we were done with the project and ready to take on the loan.
Could you explain what that acronym was?
BAN is the bond anticipation note.
Okay.
So we went to the one bank and said, hey, can you give us $500,000 while we work on this project for the next year?
Yep.
I don't know what, how high you can go with that. And then the year came up and in one of the scenarios, we still, because we ran back-to-back projects, we still didn't have enough cash. So we went back to the bank and said, hey, can you extend it one more year? Yes, we're paying interest on it, but at least we're not paying interest on the whole loan while we're in the construction phase.
So I think, I think we're in somewhat uncharted territory. This is this would be the largest bond that I think the town has ever done. It'll be one of the largest construction projects that the town has done. And that's something we're going to have to learn over the next 6 months. So again, all the voters are authorizing us to do is to move forward with this project. And if they vote no, then we don't have to do all this research. Okay. I hope they do. So yes, I think you asked good questions, Connie. And I kind of look forward to doing that research to try to figure that out.
Okay. Tara.
I appreciate you taking the time to try to figure this out, Jeff, but we hire experts to do just about everything else on things that we're not experts. And the financing of this $9.8 million largest project ever for the town really should be understood more before we put a project in front of the taxpayer to not really know. I mean, we hired architects and engineers to come up with a plan. The financing piece of it should have a plan as well, because we shouldn't just go to the taxpayer and say, this is what we think. I mean, like y'all have said, you don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to happen with the interest rates, but an expert looking at this, knowing what's the, like you're looking at, should we go 20 years or 30 years? Well, if this structure that you are rebuilding is supposed to be 100-year structure, then maybe it's less of an impact on the individual taxpayer who just got a 7% increase in their taxes for the next fiscal year to understand what's the lowest impact on them. Should it go 30 years out? Because it's a long-term project, it should maybe go, I know you're paying more interest, but if you're spreading it over a larger period of time and having the payments be less for the people in the community, it means 30 years from now, other people will be able to help pay for it, rather than put a bigger burden on the existing taxpayers now. And so I want an expert to come in and really look at the finances and really look like Ian's talking about the bond rating and the bond and the rates, and like Connie's talking about her cash flow and how does this loan work, or how does this bond work, or what, are we getting the money up front? I don't really think it's fair to go to the taxpayer. And you're saying after they've told us we could spend 9.8 million because we gave them some kind of estimated number on how it's going to impact them. Well, they said it was okay. I mean, they might like the idea of it, but the end numbers are what's going to impact them and it's going to count, especially if you're piggybacking it and starting to look about doing affordable housing projects and trying to do other things for the community. I mean, a $9.8 million investment in a structure in the floodplain, we really have to think about.
Okay, so it is getting late and we are not absolutely painted into a corner by any decision we make tonight, but we need to be able to start looking forward. So what is your recommendation that we make a motion for what should the motion be?
So I do think that we have gotten expert opinions on this from the Vermont Bond Bank. These are the options that are in front of us. There are nuances to those. I personally like the 20-year note. So I move that we structure that we build an article on the warning for a 20-year note.
So I would just not specify the term. Just put it as a note rather than a bond vote.
Okay.
Just in talking with the attorney, because that way it would give us the flexibility to either go 20, 25. We could choose the term later. He just needs to know, is it a note or a bond?
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
I move that we put onto the town warning an article that specifies a note for $9.8 million for town center renovation.
Do you want it 9.8 or do you want the exact number that we had from the architect? I just want to know how you want the paperwork to come back.
The exact number, I forget what it is, 9.816, whatever.
And then you'll have the official next time, but thank you. Just want to make sure I'm clear to the attorney.
Okay, so we have a motion for a note. Do we have a second? We have a motion from Jeff Ford for a note, seconded by David Sander. I see Ian, you got your hand up. Let's hear from you and then we're going to proceed to the vote.
Thanks. I'm just curious, all the work that's been proposed obviously are things that really need to get done. If this bond vote fails, what's the plan? Like, to just keep coming back and asking the voters, or is there going to be some kind of plan to get some of this work going?
I can answer that. So the town center committee has considered this, and frankly, we do not have a plan B. When we've looked at the work that needs to be done, it does not make much sense to do this in pieces. You know, how would you do the heating and ventilating system without doing the lighting? For example, because you have to rip apart all of the ceiling to do that. Would you do any of this project without doing flood mitigation when we probably have water in the basement right now? We have thought about it. We've tried. We asked the architect to come up with various different proposals. They were all really unsatisfactory. So if this were to go down, I see actually very little momentum in what the next plan would be. I don't know. So I don't know. That's the best.
I'm telling you, you're so full of
That's
shit.
a good answer.
That's the
No
best.
plan B. No, if you want some denial.
Yeah, I don't know. I personally, I have no knowledge about how any of this stuff gets done. So I'm just curious, really.
Okay. Well, we'll try to find answers out, but we don't have one for you right there. Lisa, I was going to move to the vote, but you're a select board member, so go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, Jeff, well, everybody, I think something that might help voters really swallow it a little better is knowing we're going to cut our costs for utilities, we're going to cut our costs for maintenance, we're going to cut, just go right down the list. We can't quantify those exactly, but there's going to be a considerable savings by renewing the building, and that helps. It doesn't pay for the whole 9.8 for sure, but that's going to be an important part of the process, I think, for introducing this to the voters.
What the committee does plan on doing, pretty robust public engagement process. Public communications plan, several tours and presentations over the next 2 months, and our intent is to, it's not our decision. Frankly, it's not the select board's decision. It's the voters' decision.
Right.
Okay.
It's the best we can do.
So let's go ahead and take a vote and move on, try to close this out. We have a motion to do a note made by Jeff Ford, seconded by David Sander. Please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, I.
And Jay, I. Thank you, everybody. We have 2 remaining items. One will require a little explanation, one won't. I hope. Our second to last item has to do with the baseball fields at Volunteers Green. They lost a ton of clay in the flood. There was a lot of temporary maintenance that now needs to be done. We have to replace the temporary stone with actual clay.
Well, could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
This could all be different after today.
You're right.
So.
Gonna table it till next week?
So I guess what I'm looking for is really guidance from the select board, because it's for the last number of years since I've been here as both town manager and Little League president, the town hasn't put money into the fields. And that's sort of the distinction with FEMA. Like, they usually look at things and say, well, if the town hasn't funded it for the last number of years, we're not going to take care of that. So what I'm looking for, and as we talked over this with FEMA, they said, well, it's a town-owned field. It's a town-owned field in a town-owned land. And even though Little League has paid for the clay over the years and volunteers have helped spread it, if Little League went away, the town would then be on the hook to maintain the fields. So they said that they would cover the cost, which is that, again, it's the 92.5 like we talked about. So what I'm really looking for from the board, I mean, it's going to change, but I want to know, does the board agree that the town should outlay that cost, knowing we'll get paid back by FEMA? And I say this with my full conflict of interest. I'm also president of Little League, so I want to make that clear that I kind of have 2 hats on right now, which is a big reason why I want to make sure that the board has a chance here.
Yeah, so, I would actually move to proceed with repairs to the baseball fields at Volunteers Green to repair the damage caused by 2023 floods.
Taking the month out, very.
Okay, motion from Jeff. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Oh.
Okay, I think let's give credit to Lisa. She doesn't get it a lot. We have a motion from Jeff Ford, seconded by Lisa Miller, to proceed with repairs at Volunteers Green to repair the damage caused by the 2023 flooding. Please state your name and your vote.
Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, I.
And Jay, I. Our last one before executive session and warrants and purchase orders and stuff, is to move the February 19th select board meeting one day out because of the President's Day holiday. The draft motion is to change the date of the second select board meeting in February from Monday, February 19th to Tuesday, February 20th in recognition of President's Day.
Mrs. David, so moved.
I'll
We have a
second. Yes.
A motion from David Sanders, seconded by Lisa Miller, to move to change the date of the second select board meeting in February from Monday, February 19th, 2024 to the following day, Tuesday, February 20th, in recognition of the President's Day holiday. Please state your name and your vote.
Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay. Continuing on our agenda, that's the last of the warrant items. We now need minutes of purchase orders and warrants. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes of December 4th?
Mrs. David, so moved.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to approve the minutes of December 4th. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Next, the minutes of the special budget meeting on December 11th. Do we have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion from David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to approve the minutes of the December 11th budget meeting. Please state your name and your vote.
It's Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay, moving on to warrants and purchase orders.
Oh, we have one purchase order.
We have one purchase order 4619 to Swenson Granite Company, and the amount of not to exceed $40,136. Do I have that correct?
So we actually want to
We need to
amend it
amend it.
to a total of 41,835.77, and that's to allow for purchase of additional curbing.
Where is that number? 41,000?
41,000.
Oh, it's up here. This.
Sorry,
this
yeah,
all didn't right.
I wrote it in. And basically, as Pete went out and remeasured, he realized that he needed a little extra curbing, and it doesn't really affect the shipping cost. So he wanted to make sure that we got the right amount here.
Okay. Any questions?
No.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Yeah, we have a motion for David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to approve purchase order 4619 to Swenson Granite Company, amending the previous purchase order to $41,835.77 to allow for purchase of additional curbing. Any discussion? Please state your name and your vote.
It's Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay, we need a motion to accept the warrants.
So moved. I'll second.
We have a motion from David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to accept the warrants. Are there any corrections or questions or any of the sort?
I'll be honest, I did not go through them.
Okay. Seeing no questions.
I'll thankfully, I did not find anything.
I didn't see anything unusual either. Okay, please state your name and your vote.
It's Jeff, I. David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay, that brings us to items for the next agenda. We just pushed out one of the questions about
Housing Summit Planning.
Housing Summit Planning, okay, and also review the draft town meeting warning.
Yep. Flood update.
Flood update. Further thoughts that may have occurred over Christmas after seasoning regarding Browns Court, volunteers, green, and around church, but specifically recreation versus housing.
Yeah, I think that's part of the housing summit.
Well, people may have thoughts extraneous to the summit.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. If anybody has anything else, you know how to reach Josh. Okay. We have two possible executive sessions. One, they would be for technically different reasons. One would be on negotiations with the police union. One would be regarding an update in hiring police officers. There are motions in the memo for the legal basis for each. If people feel these are necessary, the motions are on page 6, starting at line 279.
Jay, this is David. I move to find that premature public knowledge about negotiations with the police union would cause the town or person to suffer a substantial disadvantage.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to move to find that premature public knowledge about negotiations with the police union would cause the town or person to suffer a substantial disadvantage. Seeing no discussion, please state your name and your vote.
Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And
Jay.
Jay, aye.
Jay, this is David. I move that we enter into executive session to discuss negotiations with the police union under the provisions of one VSA 313A1B and to invite the town manager, Josh Arneson, into the executive session.
I'll second that.
Motion from David Sanders, seconded by Jeff Ford, to go ahead and move into executive session to discuss negotiations with the police union under the provisions of one VSA 313A1B and to invite town manager Josh Arneson into the session. Please state your name and your vote.
Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye.
Are you guys bringing your computers in?
No, I'm leaving it here.
Jeff, are you bringing your, yeah, just.
I guess I don't need to, really.
No, there's really. no
We just have to
reason.
be able to bring Bard and Lisa in.
Yep, I got Bard and Lisa and my computer, so we can do
We
that.
still have Aaron with us. Aaron is still with us. Aaron, we're gonna have one or two executive sessions and then adjourn.
Okay,
You don't need to stay.
all right, I will leave then. Have a great night and a great Christmas.
Hey, I'll see you on Thursday.
Have a good holiday.
All right, thanks, bye.
So we are back. For those of you watching at home,
Lisa,
We're the only ones here anyway.
looks like we are.
Not long, it's
Yeah.
last month. I need to get
I'm
out.
gonna
So
leave
you wanna
these
go?
folks over there.
Okay.
So I
Oh,
guess-
no, 'cause
Okay.
Wait a minute, hold on a
Up there, make
second.
sure the tires
By the
pumped up
way.
and exercise the plane.
Let me do this.
Have it.
Okay, they're muted. Nobody can hear them. I'm going to. Well, it's just us. I think we're back.
But will Bard and Lisa be
We
able
have
to
to
vote to
record
enter
the-
executive
Going
session?
into executive session.
Well, I think they said we have a quorum here. They're not.
No, but we have to record it.
It is being recorded
Okay.
on this.
So
and
I
it just-
I moved to find that premature public knowledge about hiring of police officers would cause a town or person to suffer a substantial disadvantage.
This is David. I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Jeff Ford, seconded by David Sander to move to find that premature public knowledge about hiring of police officers would cause the town or person to suffer a substantial disadvantage. Please state your name and your vote.
It's Jeff, I.
David, I.
Jay, aye.
Close enough.
Okay.
I move that we enter into executive session to discuss hiring of police officers under the provision of one VSA 313A3 and to invite town manager Josh Arneson into the executive session.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion for Jeff Ford, seconded by David Sander to move into executive session on the provisions of that law and invite town manager Josh Arneson. And please state your name and your vote.
This is Jeff, I.
David, I.
Jay and I will be going to another executive session and then coming back to adjourn for those of you watching on the recording.
All right, here. Why don't you sign some papers while we're waiting for the rest of them to
I
get.
live to sign papers. Just to have your,
The most fun part.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Okay, Bart is hung up.
Oh, no, I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Okay. Sorry, you're no longer green for some reason.
I move that we adjourn.
Second,
I move that way too.
Okay, so we're gonna give credit to the motion to Jeff, seconded by David. Please state your name and your vote.
That's your
Jeff, I.
David, I.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. We are adjourned. Lisa and
Hey, Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah,
Happy
I
New
won't
Year.
see you till the next year, right?
Merry
Yeah.
Christmas again. Yeah.